Hello, everybody, and welcome to Talking Landscape Photography for tonight. Paul and I have thought that it would be a really great idea to talk about gear, seeing as we've so many episodes in and we haven't really spoken too much about gear. I'm certainly a bit of a gear nerd, I have to admit. I really do enjoy researching the best tools for the job. And maybe
you should see Lucky's credit card and delivery thing going on. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, I think it's more so I think there's always a bit of a balancing act with gear, and it's quite easy to get swept up in the side of specs and wanting the best thing that's going around, and that's going to make great pictures for you. But I am also a huge believer in reinvesting the money that you earn back into this thing that we love called photography. And by doing that, we can get equipment that basically will make it easier for us to get the shots that we're after. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a better photographer, although in some cases it can certainly help with that. I think it's more about removing limitations that there may be in your workflow or what have you. What's your view on gear, Paul?
Well, I mean,
You're
there's
very
an
much more of
age-old
a
joke that a photographer just earns enough money to buy his next lens, thinking it's going to change the career and make everything so much better. And I certainly experienced that, and I think it is worth laughing about it. But at the same time, I love hanging around Mr. Tscharke because he is sharp as a tack in terms of what's out there. He does an incredible amount of research, and if there's anyone on this planet that I would ring up at any time to get a decision about an equipment purchase, it would be Luke. So I'm just going to follow on the back of Luke's coattails today. And to be perfectly honest, I think it's quite a valuable thing that he in particular is offering tonight because he's got so much years of experience and he's so on top of things. But we'll try and sort of paint the picture in a non-brand specific sort of way so we don't get so caught up in brands, because I don't. I've used Phase 1s, I've used Pentax medium format, I've used high-end Nikons. I've only used Canon. I've had a crack with Sony's. I played around with some of the Fuji's medium format and small. So I've used a lot of different equipment in my time, and I started off in film days and shot sort of 8 or 10 years of film gear. So I have a sort of a broad functionalistic kind of approach to my equipment. It gets to work really hard, and I do notice when something's holding me back. So my approach is I don't get too caught up with the Joneses, but if it becomes really clear that there's a piece of equipment that's really going to augment my workflow or help me create better work in low light situations, or I need high speed, or with improving the amount of kind of efficiency of producing jobs, then I'll start taking notice, and then I'll probably ring Luke. But
I certainly
so
do.
we're going to cover a fair bit of ground tonight. Lucky's going to lead the way because he's had a bit more experience in presenting in this regard. But I'm going to chime in if I think there's something useful I've got to add. And I've surrounded by boxes of gear at the moment, so if anything's useful, I'll pull it into picture. And I've changed my setup here, so it's no shallow depth of field, so I don't have to worry about things going blurry when I'm showing them to you.
No worries. Well, yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting area to look at, and definitely a bit of a money pit, photography. It's almost like if it's anything to do with photography, I'd put another zero on the end of it in terms of what it costs. But I guess the more money you spend, the better quality you get, and that's at least what you hope so. But I thought it would make sense to format this kind of talk tonight just around what's in my camera bag, and just going through that sequentially, and then bringing in other options and things that we can talk about from there. And certainly would encourage anyone that has any questions about anything that I'm talking about to feel free to ask questions as well. I'm certainly not an authority on anything, by the way, so it's just my own personal experience and opinions on or I guess a lot of research I've done over the period of time. So we'll start off firstly with the cameras, and deciding to get hooked on something. So this is sort of my main shooting rig right here. This is a Sony A7R4. and at the moment I've got a 12 to 24 GM on the end of that. And so out of all of the research, I guess, that I've done over the years, I've decided that I would go with the Sony system, and that's mainly, and I have to also, I guess, qualify that I am a Sony digital imaging advocate. So I'm certainly very biased in my opinions, but the reason I've used Sony cameras is because of their small size, which some people refer to them maybe as toy-like, although I do add quite a large L bracket to the bottom. It's a small rig L bracket, and what it does is it actually increases the height of the camera quite substantially. And when I grip like this, it's actually giving a much better grip on the camera. So that makes a big difference for me. So
I use it too. Same as Lucky. Small rigs, the probably cheapest and best value on the market. I have a bunch of like really white stuff ones as well, which are the top end of the market. But to be honest, it's a piece of metal that serves a purpose. It can help if you drop something, maybe. The most functional purpose, obviously, is to be able to keep your tripod central. So if you wanted to move from portrait to landscape format, you don't have to bend the top of the tripod head over. It just flicks straight away.
You've got the rail, Arca Swiss rail here, and then you can put it in portrait and it'll just clip in like that, so you don't have to move the ball head around. For anyone that hasn't used a L bracket before, if you do get one, you'll see how much better your shooting is. I didn't want to believe it, but until I tried it, and then I was hooked. And the other thing I love about this one is that it's got a quick access to the actual battery door here, just by flipping that down. So definitely recommend small rig for L brackets. Not affiliated, but they do put out.
Yeah, I mean, I literally bought my new R5 L bracket and it was $27 or something. I was like, you got to be joking. And the equivalent really white stuff is probably about 200 and something. And so even though I've got 3 really white stuff ones because they're bloody good and they last for ages, excuse my swearing, I don't think there's a bit of value out there, Lukey, and they're pretty well made. And they're
they
have these
good
magnetic
value for
keys in
money.
them.
Yeah, very good value for money. They fit well, and they really do think about their designs and engineer things well. So that's why I've chosen to use those brackets.
So brand specific's ideal, but you can get universal ones that can just fit generically on different camera systems as well.
That's right, and so with my Sony A7 II that I used to use, I was using like a $10 eBay L bracket for a long time with that one. So you don't have to spend a lot of money to get an L bracket, but I guess the more you spend, the more sort of tailored and customized the bracket is to your camera, which makes a big difference.
So they add a bit of weight, but they add a lot of functionality as well, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And it's certainly a bit of a good tip for people getting into it and having a bit of a struggle with their ball heads on their tripods. I guess the other reason I shoot with Sony is because the resolution is there as well. So this camera is a 61 megapixel. So it's really good for being able to provide large resolution files to clients. One thing I don't like about it is you can't actually change the size. So you have every shot has to be in 61 megapixel, whereas some other cameras you can actually do like SRAW or MRAW.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Smaller sized files. So it's quite frustrating that there's not an option for that. But I guess there's every camera brand has their own kind of little nuances, and there's also a couple other things with Sony that annoy me, that you can't tap the rear screen to trip the shutter, which I've always found quite frustrating, because it'd be nice to do a bulb timer or something just by tapping the screen to start and stop it, rather than like if you forget your remote, you're kind of out of luck. So that can be quite painful.
The other great functionality of a touchscreen is you can actually do tap, tap, tap in the photograph and do like a focus stacking without even having to adjust anything manually. I can literally in 3 seconds or 4 seconds do like a five image focus stack just by touching the back of the screen. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, no, that adds a lot of versatility. I have been playing, and I've got it here. It's actually this is the Sony A7S III, which has only just really come out in the last, I don't even know if it's commercially available yet, actually. I'm loaning it from Sony at the moment.
Yeah, right.
It's got the sort of like articulating screen, which is quite unusual, quite different for Sony cameras that normally have a vertical flip. which Canon users and other people are kind of like, oh yeah, we've had that for ages. But yeah, it's definitely something to get used to. But one thing you can do with that is you can tap and to track the different sort of focus points that you're looking at if anything's moving, which is really handy.
And they're really good at video, aren't they, Loki? That particular model.
Yeah, this one's just come out. It's got 4K up to 100 frames. I guess it's 120 if you go to NTSC, but in PAL it's 100 frames at in 4K. So it means you can slow down the footage 4 times and still have a nice sort of smooth, more cinematic look to your footage, and very high quality 4K footage. So, and it doesn't turn into a frying pan or anything if you leave it on for too long.
I was waiting for that, Loki. The other thing for Sony's, I find particularly some models are exceptional at low light photography. I think they probably have the top of the market with the A7S series. So, Loki.
Yeah, the low light's great, and the reason is, I mean, the sensor. We obviously won't be able to tell from here, but the sensor's a 12 megapixel sensor. So whilst that means that, you know, it's very low resolution, it's pretty hard to get much more out of probably a A4 print or something out of that sort of resolution. But what it does mean is that the little pixels on the sensor are actually a little bit larger than the other cameras, and so that means that if you think of them like buckets, there's a lot more light collecting potential from that, and so the lower resolution will generally give you better low light performance, and that's quite true. My A7R4 that has quite not as good low light performance, I should say. Certainly not as good as the A7R3, which I still think is probably one of the bargain basement cameras available at the moment. It's a brilliant camera. Same with the A7 III, which I also have. So I use the A7 III mainly for astrophotography. And that's because it's 24 megapixel, so it has it's got a nice balance. It's not 12, so you can still, 24 is kind of big enough to get decent sized prints out of, and it's got really good low light performance. So I sort of see this as a sweet spot for astrophotography from sort of my dealings. I find that the 12 megapixel, when you have to actually put it out into prints, is just not very palatable unless you're doing panos and stitching or something like that. So I think this is the way, and the A7R4 is probably not too far away, hopefully. And that should have a lot of the features that have been introduced in, like the touch, the flip screen and things like that. That's in the A7S III. So
I mean, Lucky made a point about something I want to accentuate, like in terms of, say, a certain model suddenly hits a price point where it's the best value, and normally that's kind of maybe a year or so after it's been released. Like I did something unusual, and I bought the Canon R5, which was right. I got the first one in Tasmania, so I wasn't getting any discounts, I can tell you. And some guy sent me a link last week for a purchase that was $1,300 cheaper than I bought mine for, and I was like, oh my god. So I took the hit. But quite commonly, in pretty much all brands, if you take your time a little bit and you do a bit of research in the sweet spot, and even secondhand to some extent, like I remember the 6Ds when they came out. Lucky, did you have one?
I was very close to buying a 6D for astrophotography. The 6D Mark I has got to be one of the best options for anyone getting into astrophotography.
Best value cameras.
Value for money, if you can find one. They're absolutely brilliant, and I believe the low light performance was actually maybe even a little bit better than the 6D Mark II. So yeah, so it's really and a lot of people convert the 6D Mark I to for astrophotography performance, so they'll change the filters out and make it even better for maybe deep space astrophotography and things like that, or mod it for you can actually put a cooling chip inside the camera, so they completely take the camera apart, put a cooling chip behind the sensor, and so what that does is it actually allows you to it really reduces the amount of noise in the picture, because the warmer the sensor gets, the more noise you get. So if you can have an active cooled sensor like that, then you can actually get really extremely good low light performance. It does make the camera very unwieldy and probably not practical from a fieldwork perspective, but there's a pretty interesting modification to look up if you're really into astrophotography in terms, more so probably from deep space. But I'd love to play with a camera with a cooling chip on it. I think it would be pretty awesome.
Rob Lakers didn't get a chance to share it on the show, but one of his tips was actually hooking on a little tiny little electric fan that runs across the front element. So if you're doing a long time lapse, or you're somewhere where it might get moisture, or it's a multiple hour sort of exposure, you prevent any sort of moisture building up on the front of the lens.
Oh, that's a pretty good tip. You can also get USB warmers as well. I normally keep one in my bag. It's probably in there somewhere. And what you can do with that is you can plug it into a USB power bank and wrap the other end of it around the lens, and that'll just warm up the lens very slightly. All you have to do is really raise the lens temperature above the dew point, and you'll stop condensation from forming inside the lens. So did I say forming? Creating it inside the lens. So yeah, so that's definitely some
well, just in terms of the brand stuff, Lucky, I'd probably stand behind Luke in that. In terms of astrophotography, I'd say Sony's potentially the best because of its capacity and low light is incredible.
Well, to be honest, if I thought that there was something better out there, I'd probably be using it. But for my use case, that's sort of where I've come to. Yeah.
So I guess your brand choice is a little bit about on what are you mainly going to be shooting. So I'm a Canon boy and I have been for probably 25 years now. And part of that reason is their color science is renowned to be fantastic for portraiture and skin. And I don't think anybody's topped that. I've heard a few rumors about the odd camera here and there of a different brand that comes close, but it's still good for landscapes and it's still good for astro, but it's not brilliant like the Sony is. And the earlier Sonys had issues with, say, skin tones, which they've addressed quite well in the latest models. But in the early days, I used the A7 II, and I didn't like the file structure at all, and I was really struggled with it, and it actually put me off going to Sony for skin and so on. But it was quite good for crisp, cool landscapes. So it's a little bit about being really clear. If there's an overriding factor of what is most important to you to shoot, that might influence your decision about a brand. And for instance, Nikon somewhere in between. It's quite capable at both. I think the color science is now getting on par across the board, where I don't think you have any issue. I think the latest ones also have a new introduction across the board on most brands of doing like eye focus, where it'll actually track the eyes of your subjects and also animals, and you can switch from one to the other. The new Z7 Nikons do it, the Sonys do it, the latest Canons R5s and R6s do it. That's if it's really important to you to have video auto focusing, which is kind of a little bit newer as well, because a lot of the older DSLR videos didn't have tracking, and it was up to you to either follow focus, and you had to be brilliant at that, or just lock it off. And Sony's particularly brilliant at low light video in particular. I think Canon's sort of caught up, and they've been a bit behind the ball for quite a long time with a lot of the other brands, and their release of the R5 and R6 is getting them up to speed on a lot of levels, except for maybe the heating on the video, but which is partly addressed by the new software upgrades, to be fair, and the new firmware upgrades, which I just put in on the camera. But I'm looking. What do you want to move to next, to lens choices or?
Yeah, well, I was just going to mention actually with Nikon, we normally would have Nick on, but unfortunately he's at work. He's doing very important services.
He's meant to round us out, and so we're not on the other side of the boxing ring,
Yeah, well, Nick's been a Nikon shooter since forever, and so he would have been good to balance all of that. I know, but I was going to mention that I really do think Nikon are extremely good cameras for landscape photography, especially the D850, which would have to be one of the best, if not the best, landscape photography camera there is.
As for DSLRs, I think it's the best one in the world.
Yeah, because
has been for a while.
And I was really tempted, I have to admit, to go to Nikon a long time ago. And the one thing that was always stopping me was they have, in terms of their wide angle lenses for landscapes, they have a 14-24 and it's a 2.8, but it needs 150 mil filters, and I was always trying to avoid getting 150 mil filters because it's just, they seem very impractical to carry around. And so that was pretty much the main reason why I didn't go to Nikon, was actually because of the lens choice. And the irony of it is now, of course, that I have the 12 to 24, which I do need 150 mil filters for. So it's a little bit hypocritical, but you know, opinions can change with time, I suppose.
If you're looking second hand, I'd say the D800 810 series are still brilliant cameras.
Oh yeah,
Very robust and very hardworking and extremely capable.
definitely professional grade workhorses. There's no doubt about that for landscapes. I guess we haven't really touched on other brands like Fuji, which I've always eyed off as well in terms of their GFX series. But
Yeah, the medium format systems are amazing. There's some when you think of medium format, all of a sudden you think, oh my god, they're going to be so heavy and big. Well, the Fuji is actually not.
yeah,
It's got a bit of size bulk, but it's really light relative to what it is. If you pick up a phase one, it's like it's like a bit of a brick. But the lens quality on it and the sensor quality is just out of this world. It's like
mm,
cream just dripping down your screen. It's unbelievable. But Fuji done a lot of work in terms of being very functional. The menu system is pretty amazing. Sony's been a little bit renowned for not maybe having the most fluid and easy to manage menu system. Canon's
that's
always been renowned
actually
of
been addressed with the A7S3. So it's most likely that all
moving it up a bit. Yeah.
new releases will probably have the new menu
I mean,
system.
you just get used to it.
Yeah, you
Canon's
do.
always been renowned as having a very ergonomic one, and
I
they've
do
kept
love
that
Canon's menu.
thread all the way through. They're quite. It's like starting a computer with a Mac. It's a lot more intuitive up front, but any computer or any piece of equipment, once you get used to it, you just work with it.
Mm.
Um,
And it's
Fuji
like you can
has
always
this.
program buttons too to do the things you need to do. So if the camera's got good customizability, you often don't need to go into
Gotcha.
the menus anyway because you can assign different buttons to do those functions. So that's always a good feature.
So with the Fuji's, they've kind of got this split system where they have these XT2s and XT3s, and they have a smaller, very, very kind of versatile and very beautiful travel cameras. So they're really quite light and simple and quite capable. The Olympus is very similar in that regard, in that they have probably the smallest and lightest system out there, really, that has access to a really broad range of lenses. And that's one thing to look at a little bit when you invest in a system is how many lenses are there? What sort of capacity do I have to grow into the system over time?
Yeah, and
And
the
obviously, Nikon
crazy
and
thing,
Canon's been around for a gazillion years, so there's more lenses than you can poke a stick at. Sony's been around long enough that they've got a really good fleet of lenses now at a really high caliber. Canon's just changed its mount system to a larger flange, which means if you buy into the R5 and R6 and the EOS R, you actually need an adapter to use your old lenses. But what's beautiful about that adapter is there's no glass, so the optical quality is 100%. And I've actually heard that the focusing ring on it is so good, it could actually make your older lenses focus faster than before. So, and that was a bit of an issue, I think, with the early Sony adapters, is they weren't particularly
oh,
amazing, but
definitely.
the new ones
It was
are.
actually more the camera's fault, to be honest. Well, they were having to reverse engineer the adapters to work with the camera, and the A7 original was awful with an adapter. You basically were better off manually focusing with that. And now the performance with the newer cameras is just as good as if you weren't using an adapter and you were using it as a native lens. So definitely come a long way that way. But I certainly had a few very, very frustrating years adapting Canon lenses onto Sony and trying to autofocus and get people to smile for you while things going. It's a bit it's a bit embarrassing.
I think
Um,
the other big shift in most systems in the last 4 years is inbuilt image stabilization. And Canon was actually the last to bring it in. They just brought it in with the R5 and the R6, just literally in the last sort of 3 or 4 months. But I guess they had such a massive fleet of image stabilized lenses that maybe they thought it was overkill. Whereas some of the other brands like Fuji and I think Olympus brought it in really quite early. Sony's had it for a while, I think, too, Lucky.
oh
Um,
yeah, yeah, they brought it in the A7R2 range. It wasn't in the A7R1. Yeah. So yeah, no, that's definitely a big factor. And I think as it improves, we may get to points where you can take a lot of, and I guess it's almost there at the moment where you can handhold shots that you normally would need a tripod for. So that's pretty exciting that you can
Yeah,
get
I
to
mean,
that sort of point.
I bought the with my R5. I bought the new RF 2405 because it's actually that combination is the best in the world. It's 8 stops,
Mm.
And I was like, hello, does this mean I can do video without using any sort of gyro? And I've been giving that a bit of a whirl lately just to see. And I've taken street shots at like a second and a half by hand, and they're crisp in the background with flowing traffic. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is a bit of a game changer.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. With the A7S3, it has active stabilization, so I've been playing with that, and it does punch in a little bit, so you lose a bit of crop. But the interesting thing about that is that it really does almost, you don't need a gimbal, and then the camera also records gyro data. So then when you download the video, you can actually then further process the video using the gyro data in the software to further stabilize the footage. So you can end up with some super smooth footage just from hand holding. You still have to have the right technique when you're hand holding. You can't sort of jolt it around. You still need to move very smoothly, but it's pretty amazing that you can, get that kind of quality of footage just from hand holding these days. I bought a gimbal, but I don't know how much use it's going to get if I get into this sort of thing.
So I guess the bigger picture of systems is, number one, price. Number two, portability. Do you need something light and small? Are you after the highest resolution? And price is an issue, in which case you might look at the medium format market. Phase one is probably the top tier. GFX is close behind, but a lot more affordable. The Pentax system has been right up there for quite a while. I've actually used that quite a bit, the 645 Z system. And the second-hand versions of those are becoming way more affordable now. I've had a little bit of a play with the Hasselblad system, but not heaps. My friend Scotty has. And then you move into the DSLR market, which is probably led by the D850 and Nikon. The 5D4 Canon's probably nipping on its heels in terms of versatility and capability. 5D3 is still a good one. I've still got my two 5D Mark IIIs here. And then, of course, you've got the mirrorless market, which is designed more for, and it's probably where it's headed in the future. Like Canon's, from what I can tell, is actually ditching their DSLR line and they're moving completely into medium format. And so they've pulled all their DSLR technology and styling and even the physical buttons and structures on the back into the mirrorless system now with the R5 and R6. So I'm guessing they're going to keep their flagship super weather sealed 1DX, for instance, and just for those really hard hitting pros, but they're moving everything towards mirrorless. And Sony's been leading the charge in mirrorless for quite a long time now. Nikon's jumped on the bandwagon really beautifully with the Z series. Canon's right up there, a little bit more expensively maybe, but at the same time, the money to change systems and buy new lenses, I decided wasn't worth it anyway. And color science is still brilliant, and I'm kind of glad I waited now, because it's sort of, this camera can do freaking everything I can possibly imagine and want it to do. The Olympus is probably one of the lightest. The Fuji is also really right up there. I don't know who we're missing out, Lukey, but it's sort of you just got to juggle up, and then
pretty good cross section. There's also Panasonic and a few others as well.
Yeah, some of the Panasonic series are pretty clever, especially on the video realm and the vlogging sort of realm.
Leica as well, which is a bit more of a premium offering, I suppose.
Yeah, but they know what they're doing. And then there's also, what fleet range of lenses have they got? So the Fuji's kind of newer, for instance, on the GFX range. So their lens range isn't as wide as, say, some of the others. And some of the advantages of the file caliber of, say, the medium format systems is now getting a bit challenged by, how good the high-end Sonys are and how good the high-end Canons now are, and even how good the Z series and Nikons are being. So that gap's probably shrinking a little bit compared to how it was maybe the last 4 or 5 years. But yeah, price definitely comes in. And then secondhand market as well. Like I'm always a bit wary of getting secondhand bodies to some extent, but I'm not too shy on the lenses, because lenses tend to be a little bit more robust with a little bit less electrics in them, and some of them can last 10, 15 years, 20 years and still be in good shape. In terms of building up your fleet, like a lot of my lenses secondhand. In fact, my favorite one I got secondhand. I made sure it was from somebody reputable, and it just goes amazing. Because lenses, when they brand new and cameras, when they go out the door, you lose 40% straight away, probably.
That's it. We had a question actually in the chat about thoughts on mirrorless versus DSLR, and we've probably covered it mainly, but I guess for me, it's sort of, once you go to mirrorless, it's very hard to look back. And I think just little things like being able to look through an electronic viewfinder and actually play the photo back and look through the viewfinder as kind of like a loop, and using that as another screen essentially is a massive ability. Not to mention the smaller size, and generally smaller lenses and that kind of thing as well. So it's certainly for someone that likes to get out in the field and do landscape photography, it's definitely a really, really great transition to make. And I have used a DSLR here and there since, and it does feel very clunky to go back to that.
It depends on the models. The DSLRs are generally really robust physically, and a lot of the top models are quite well weather sealed. And some of the earlier mirrorlesses maybe not so much. What's incredible about mirrorless, because I've just made that shift this year for the very first time, is as simple as it sounds, what you see is what you get when you look through the viewfinder of a mirrorless camera. So if you've adjusted, the exposure, the ISO, the brightness of the whole thing, often when you're looking through the back of a DSLR, everything's just wide open, and it'll always give you the brightest sort of rendition of what you're going to see, which is not necessarily realistic to the exposure that you've actually chosen for that shot. So you get a very, very realistic appraisal before you take the photograph, rather than having to look on the back of the screen and go, oh, that was a bit dark, or I got that wrong. And being able to see that while you're shooting or while you're setting up a shot rather than after can be quite amazing in terms of just giving yourself confidence and clarity about having the right settings, and having it all ready to go.
Yeah,
There used to be lag issues, Lukey, didn't there? But not so much anymore.
Yeah,
in
it's
terms of the
getting better and
speed.
better. It's going to get to a point where it's not going to be, it'll be equivalent to, I think, even the resolution of the A7S3 is some crazy thing, and I think the R5 is one of the most highest resolution EVFs going around.
I think it's the top, so it's very realistic. I waited, to be honest. When I looked at some of the early ones, I was seeing the lag, and I do a lot of sport and action stuff, and people running around everywhere. And if I literally would lose shots if I had to wait half a second or a second before it was actually showing me what was in front of me. And Sony's really pushed hard with that. The new Canon is quite amazing. You can actually push it a bit harder to get it as on this highest, smoothest setting if it's really important to you to get that lag to a minimal. I do find that mirrorless cameras generally chew through more batteries. The early Sonys in particular were a bit pretty rough around the edges in that regard.
Sony, that gave Sony a terrible reputation for battery life. But the interesting thing when you look at it, and it's going to sound a bit of a fanboy thing here, but the actual capacity of the battery was probably more the issue rather than the actual battery life itself. And because they were trying to make such a small device, probably too small in the end, because now they've made it bigger, the actual capacity was really the problem there, not so much the battery life. And so with making their body a bit bigger, they were able to get the Z series battery in there, which was a game changer overnight. It just, from the A7R2 to A7R3, the battery life just was almost double, it felt like. So
so it's really good. In fact, it might even be better than the Canon a bit now. The R5 they've recognized that as being an issue, and they've actually created a new battery particularly to work with the R5 and R6 that has about 15% higher capacity. But what's beautiful about the Canon system is you've got a battery 10 years old from original 5D, it's still going to work in your R5. So my fleet of batteries, and I've got about 10, is I can just slip in and out beautifully. So whereas a lot of sometimes when they change models and sizes, it's all of a sudden, your fleet of batteries is useless.
Yeah, that backwards compatibility definitely makes it a lot more palatable. I think there would have been uproar if they changed it too much.
Yeah, but I've noticed a significant difference in terms of battery in general. It maybe even, just over half maybe. So I just bought, actually, and they just arrived today, a couple of extra of the high capacity batteries just in that regard. But what's also cool is I'm running my R5 right now to do this video, and with that particular new battery, I can plug it into power and have this video running for 10 hours straight. No worries.
That's another massive advantage of mirrorless, hey, because you can, with most mirrorless cameras, you can actually plug a battery pack in, or some sort of external power source, and actually power the device even while you're using it, which is pretty remarkable. So if you're running really low on battery, and you have an important shoot, you can just plug in a power bank on the side and just keep shooting, which is actually, and if you're doing a time lapse and you're wanting to shoot for hours and hours, you can just plug in a battery bank and it will just keep it running off the battery bank. So definitely sort of what, and if you're going on multi-day hiking, it's really good, because then you can just plug it into the camera and charge off the battery bank. So it sort of halves the number of batteries you need to take on some of those trips, which is really good.
Yeah, so I think in terms of where photography is heading in general, I think mirrorless is definitely the future. I wouldn't have said that 2 or 3 years ago. I was sitting on the fence just going, yeah, but there's all these issues with lag and battery life and, and so on and so on. And I just think they've just really caught up now. And I can say that with integrity with the R5, because I've been using Canon systems 25 years, and it's the most capable camera I've ever used. It's freaking amazing. And there's probably nothing about it that I don't really like. Sort of fried eggs aside, Lukey.
Well, I made that acknowledgement when I upgraded from the A7R2 to the A7R3. I found that A7R2 still had a few things about it that was a bit toy-like in a way, or just how I felt about the camera. But when I went up to the A7R3, I was like, this is actually a camera that feels like a DSLR, that sort of performs like I'd expect, or what I was getting out of a DSLR. So that's really the big shift for me. And the upgrade between the 3 and the 4 is a little bit more incremental in terms of functionality, but the biggest shift was definitely from the 2 to the 3 in that respect. Yeah.
The other big issue that's been addressed now is focusing speed. In the early days, some of the early mirrors were pretty average, fine for landscape, fine for still subjects, but would really struggle with fast moving sort of work, and they've really upped the game now, and I would say that's almost not really an issue at all anymore, Lucky, at the higher end. But it's worth keeping in mind if you're
eye autofocus and animal eye autofocus and things like that, which is making life very easy for if you're doing any portraits or anything like that. So definitely those sort of little options and features make a big difference.
But I sort of mentioned that because if you are looking secondhand at some older models, you do want to maybe do a little bit of homework about whether focusing speed is an issue for you or battery life is an issue for you, because there's definitely been a big transition in the last 4 or 5 years with mirrorless to get up to the level that they are now, where there were some significant compromises, and they've pretty much addressed them all the latest models. But it's big money. Like when the R5 came out, it was 7K, I think it was retailing at, or 6.5, which is a fair chunk of change when it doesn't come with a lens.
Well, I have to say, it's still very affordable. Like the A7 III, that was on Black Friday, that was just on sale. I saw it for under $2,000. I think is like the bargain of the century, really. Getting something like that.
One of those cameras that at the moment has hit that sweet spot of value for money is incredible.
Yeah, for video and stills and all of that, it's a bit of a no-brainer in that respect. So I'm very
and with the latest adapters,
the A7R4.
Sorry, with the latest adapters, Lukey, it's if you're going to say switch to Sony and from something else like Nikon or Canon, with the right adapters, you can bring most of your lenses over, or not necessarily, or how does it sort of work?
Yeah, I mean, if you've got any, it has to be a DSLR lens, so you won't be able to put any sort of RF mount lenses on or any of the Z series lenses. It has to be a DSLR lens essentially. So that's the key thing, to be able to adapt it on there. There may be little ways you can get some of the others on there from the other mirrorless lenses, but if you're going from a DSLR lens down to a mirrorless lens, you can generally adapt that across pretty much all of the brands. There's an adapter that'll make it fit. So that means that you're not only getting all of the lenses that your brand can do, but then also all of the other lenses that have ever been made in a way that can fit on there, which is pretty remarkable. It's really quite cool. So that's, and I still use a few DSLR lenses now on the Sony, not so many. I've tried to go native as possible. You're always going to get better performance out of your camera if you're using a native lens. But it's really great to have that option. So I've got tilt shifts and a few other things that I can use that adapt on there just fine. So that's always good.
Lenses, Loki.
Yeah, lenses, yes. So for me, the critical key lenses, I think the workhorse stable for a landscape photographer is a 16 to 35 if you're working on full frame. And so I use the Sony 1635 f2.8. I recently got the 12 to 24 as well for astrophotography mainly. But if I was going into the field for a big walk or anything, I'd probably use the 16 to 35 mainly because it's got the screw-on filter thread. So it just makes it a lot easier. I can just take a small pouch of 82mm filters and just screw them on there. So it makes it a lot easier to shoot with. And then I think the other real key lens is the 24 to 105 or 2470. I think as a landscape photographer, probably a 24-105 is more useful as a range. Certainly, if you're doing aerial photography or you're mixing it with a bit of travel photography, just that extra 35mm makes a massive difference. And normally you lose a stop going from 2.8 to f4. But that often in that focal length range, f4 is enough anyway. So
I mean, Nikon and Canon do a 24-70-2.8, which is a kind of a combination. A lot of wedding photographers use it, as well as maybe some landscape shooters.
Yeah, I've always toyed with the idea of having a 24-70 2.8, but I just always sort of think that I just don't see enough out in the 2.8 versus f4 to warrant that, and I just think that having that extra 35mm is so much more beneficial than the extra stop. So that's the call I've made. Some people might disagree.
Brilliant all-round travel lens.
Yeah,
24-105.
and yours, your RF one looks amazing. That's the one with the really good stabilization.
Yeah. So I've had the original 24-105 for about a decade, and that thing has been through hell and back. And I don't know how many rainstorms it's been in, or how many things got banged into it. It's a miracle it's even working, but you could say that about most of my equipment with the life that it gets. But I should be
not working.
I should be a tester of some kind, I reckon. But I think, like, if I just jumping ahead slightly, if there's two lenses I chuck in a bag and I have no idea where I'm going, what I'm doing, what's going to happen, I'll just have two. I put my 24-105 in because that pretty much covers just about any range. And even though it's not 16 wide, you can always stitch with it if need be in the moment. And if you're saving weight, and then I put my little nifty 50 1.4, and that is a brilliant portrait lens. A lot of people actually use it for stitching. It's really light. It's really portable. It's very unassuming if you need to pull it out in a situation with a lot of people around, or you want to be a bit low key. So between those two lenses, like, I'll often just, if I don't know if I'm going to shoot, I'll just chuck that in there. And I know that whatever comes up, I'll be able to figure something out with those two lenses. It's brilliant. Brilliant combo.
Actually, if I could only take one
and
lens,
a very cost-effective combo too, actually.
Oh yeah, definitely. If I could only take one lens, it would actually be really hard for me because I would have to know a little bit about what the shoot was going to be. But I'd actually be more inclined to go towards the 16 to 35. With the A7R4, you can actually crop in and still use that quite usable.
Gotcha.
So you actually can get a bit of extra sort of length out of it. But yeah, if it was more of a sort of, I do a lot of photography for walking companies. If I was doing more of that sort of work, I'd definitely look at the 24-105 more so. So it'd be, but if I could only take two, it's a no-brainer. It would be the 16-35 and the 24-105.
And a lot of the 24-105s have inbuilt stabilization with them as well, which also makes them extra versatile.
It's actually really popular as video lenses as well because of that, and they've got a really great range. And like the lens that you used to have, the 24-105 Canon was very, very popular for videographers getting into it, just for the versatile focal length range and also the stabilization. So it just pairs up really, really well with those cameras. So definitely.
I have a 16-35 Canon version 2.8, and I think I've got the Mark II. I think the Mark III is quite a bit sharper, but it's also about $3,500. So to upgrade it for a slightly sharper lens, I'm like, oh, maybe I'll invest in Topaz sharpening software instead. Not quite the same. And I think it's a little bit debatable. I think if you're into Astro and you don't have a wider lens, then the 2.8 is really nice. But if you have a separate Astro lens, then investing in the half the price 16-35 f4 Canon is actually really affordable option, and it's a newer lens as well. And it's probably the best bang for the buck.
It's brilliant. I used to shoot with that. In fact, when I went to Sony, I was still shooting with that 16-35 f4L for a long time. I took it up into Tasmanian high country and all sorts. And it's also an extremely good performer in infrared as well. There's no hotspot at all. It's brilliant for that. So
if you're just doing landscapes and not focus on astro either, then it's all you need.
Either that, or you could get the 1635 f4L, and then you'd get like a 14mm Samyang, which is also quite inexpensive as your Astro lens, and then you sort of covered both bases.
That's 2.8 as well, Lucky.
Yeah, that's a 2.8, although there's
Yeah.
probably a few other choices out there now. I mean, I think one of the best Astro lenses that's not Sony is actually the kind of a rival. It's the 14. There's a new 14 to, I think it's 14 to 24 Sigma 2.8, which is a brilliant lens as well. So that's a really good buy, I think, at the price point that it is. I think it's about $2,000.
Which is the one that Fipsy bought, the 14mm? Is that the same yang?
There's a Samyang 14mm XP, which is an f2.4 lens, and that's really good as well. But you know, I've tried to get away from having a dedicated Astro lens. I really like the idea of having my zoom lens also be able to do Astro really well, and that's why I got the 12 to 24, because it just means you can go out with one lens. If I'm hiking, I don't have to take a second lens for the Astro. It's all in one there, and the quality is really very close, if not on par, with a prime lens, which is pretty insane.
So just for those of you that aren't familiar with Astro, basically having a large aperture is a great advantage in getting the extra light into the sensor for Astros. So 2.8 or wider is ideal. Like f4 doesn't quite cut it unless maybe you're using one of the top low light Sony sensors and a very wide lens. So the width is a great advantage in Astro, and also the more wide open apertures. And that's where they get maybe a little bit more specialized, and sometimes the fixed lenses are more affordable, and they're often sharper than zoom lenses. But in the modern day and age, the zoom lenses are getting so good that's probably a little bit of a moot point. But that being said, you know, like, what is that 12-24 retail at, Lucky?
5.5.
Yeah, so you'll get the quality you want, but you got to pay for it.
Yeah, it's definitely never bought a lens. I never thought, when I was getting into it, I thought, you know, buying a lens over $1,000 was expensive.
I think that was the first time Luke actually rang me up and said, "You reckon it's worth it?"
Well,
because normally it's the other way around.
It's not really a very easy thing to do, to drop that kind of money. But you know, when you do as much research and understand, you know, where a product's placed, you know, to have 12mm and 24 in that whole range, it's pretty incredible. The other good thing about 12mm is really wide for astrophotography is because the focal range or focal length is so wide. You know, I think it's close to 180 degrees.
Do longer exposures.
The rotation of the Earth is much smaller. It's always the same, but the
relatively.
The relative rotation is much smaller. So what it means is you can get away with longer shutter speeds than you could with a narrower lens. So you can really push that a little bit further.
So you can let more light in and hopefully keep your ISO a little bit lower.
And the interesting thing too is, after getting the A7R4, I really had to cut down my exposure times, because the higher resolution then has the reverse effect of it really amplifying, or you can zoom in much further and see the stars moving. So you have to actually cut that exposure time down.
Yeah,
which is, so not only are you getting better, you know, not as good low light performance, but then you also have to shoot for less as well. So high resolution in astrophotography is actually not really compatible in that way, and that's where I think the A7
well, that actually translates to, you know, real life photography as well. So it's quite renowned that, you know, like if you shoot with a phase 1 or even the R5 with a really big sensor, is you actually do need to use higher shutter speeds than you would have before, because they're going to pick up on any sort of movement a lot more, and they're less forgiving. And that's something you kind of find out the hard way, because you won't necessarily see that on the back of your screen when you're out shooting, but you will when you get home. So there's sort of, the larger sensors are a little bit less forgiving in terms of movement in particular.
It's very true. And that, yeah, that you really have to, I think I don't have to add too much more to that, apart from it's just very unforgiving if you get it wrong. So I always try and probably push the shutter speed up a little bit further than I probably need to, just for a bit of safety margin. I think a lot of the time with the A7R4, I'm not going below 1/250th all that often, or 1/125th all that often, just depending on what I'm doing, just to that safety margin. One lens that I really have used a lot more than I thought lately is this is a 100 to 400, and so the 100 to 400 is I guess I'm used to more shooting the big grand scene with the 16 to 35, and so having a lens like a telephoto lens essentially means you can really zoom in on and capture more of the detail instead. So that's definitely a really useful addition. They're often a fair bit heavier though, so it makes it a bit less practical to carry around for sort of long distances and that sort of thing. But
So I've got the Canon, not quite equivalent, but this is their workhorse 7200, which I do use a hell of a lot, but it's heavy as it's 2.8. It's also, you can get a non-image stabilizer or non-image stabilized version, which is actually
2.8 the weight, or is that
2.8. I don't know. No, that's the aperture. Thanks, Lee. But the new version of this on the RF is at least a third of the weight and a third of the size as well, actually, for the same performance. So I was sort of almost considering that, because this is one, if I'm doing a world trip, I'm sort of umming it. This is the one I'm umming about the most.
I
But in
couldn't
terms of
imagine
portrait
carrying
and
that
event
around the world.
work and even some landscape detail work, it's long renowned as one of Canon's top and most versatile lenses, and huge amount of people have been using them for well over a decade and loving it. But it's a little bit more of a home lens than that because of the weight. But it's a brilliant performer.
Yeah, it's a really hard one to take out in the field. I actually used to own that lens myself, and I totally agree with everything you said about it. But yeah, I actually had to sell it because I just found it too heavy in my bag all the
If you're
time.
doing multi-day walking,
Yeah,
I probably wouldn't do it. I did have the 7200 f4, which was about half the weight and size of that, and it was still quite sharp. And I found that
yeah,
really useful,
they're
like
really
bushwalking.
regarded well. Yeah, they're a good buy actually. If you don't need
They're
the
very good
2.8,
value for what they are, actually.
yeah, they're really. I think you can get them. There's an unstabilized one too, or non-IS
Yeah,
for it's like quite often like $700 or something like that.
yeah,
It's
like
really
secondhand.
quite
Yeah,
affordable.
we've got an
Uh,
audience question, Lukey, about how we feel about grey market sellers that are, like 25% less. What
yeah,
are the
look,
pros and cons?
yeah, I think it's a bit of a false economy in a way. By the time you get it over, now they're going to whack you with GST and all of that anyway, and customs costs and all of that. I used to, I ordered a couple lenses back when the dollar was parity, and they were really good buys back then. But nowadays, I really don't think you're much better off just looking out for sales, to be honest, and just waiting for those. They always do come around. Or sometimes you can talk to reps or other people that can organize a discount for you as well. So I really think that's a better
It
option than
depends. It
going.
depends a little bit about what we're buying. So I actually bit the bullet and paid, well, it's actually the best price I was going in the country, but I bought it from my local store and I bought an R5. I thought, you know what? I want someone to be able to back this up. I want someone to be able to go down and talk to if there's any issues with this. This is a huge investment and I want somebody behind it. The other issue with Canon is if you buy grey market, you can't get warranties here, and there's all sorts of tricky issues potentially of having to send your lenses to Hong Kong or something to get them fixed, or wherever that grey market thing might have some potentially sketchy sort of equivalent of warranty. The other issue is with CPS. If you want to have your lenses in the
Kind of
CPS, which
professional
is like
services.
professional service for fast turnaround, then it needs to be an official Canon one as well, or they won't support you with it. And in fact, you can't become a CPS member unless you prove you have a certain number of lenses that are bought by an official Canon retailer. That being said, probably one of the best bang for the buck places to buy gear with Canon that is officially Canon is DigiDirect. They have a really big buying pool. They have pretty good service. They have shops around the country, and they usually have as good a rates as anyone. I remember when I was first shopping around, because I used to look around at all sorts and check the shady deals. And there may be something that's cheaper or less important in my gear. I might consider doing that. But with my big purchases, I won't go there anymore. But I mean, as a professional, there's other issues as to why. But I kind of explained the basics.
The only thing I might look at getting lens wise overseas is if it was a really cheap lens for whatever reason. Like I back in the day, I did buy a Samyang 14 mil for like $400 from overseas because it was sort of like just not as consequential if something went wrong with it. But yeah, I would strongly advise against doing that these days unless you've got a very good reason for it.
And
Yeah.
just keep in mind how the market works. Like this time of the year, we just had the Black Friday sales, which is actually a brilliant time to buy equipment. And pretty much every reseller on anything in Australia is doing good deals. So if you know ahead of time that that's coming, it's pretty consistent. That's something you might sort of aim for in terms of where to make your purchases.
That's a really good
Or when, I
idea.
should say.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. I know that for me, if I've got an idea in my mind of what I want, it's very hard to wait. That's probably speaks more about my
Yeah,
personality
that's
than
for highly
anything.
disciplined people.
But yeah, no, that's definitely a good tip if you can manage to hold off. So yeah, I buy pretty much all of my equipment direct from Sony these days. So I'm from the online store. So I know where it's coming from, and I know that if I need to get anything fixed or anything, it just goes straight back to them. So
And I guess the second-hand market in general has got its own. Robin was just making a comment about that. It's always a bit of a risk buying something that you haven't physically seen or tested yourself.
yeah,
Um,
secondhand definitely. Yeah, secondhand. I would never buy a lens secondhand online with it sight unseen. Just couldn't do it.
yeah. No, I've literally, like, if I knew I was doing a trip to Melbourne, I would actually do some researching beforehand, and then I would go and meet that person. In fact, my current favorite lens, which is an absolutely exquisite lens, it's the new Canon 85 1.4 IS, which is just the most incredible lens I've ever used. And I actually use this for my portraiture and all my aerial work, actually. And it's probably the sharpest thing I've ever used. It's a little bit heavy, but I met someone physically in Melbourne. I got it for like $800 off, and she'd used it for like 2 months or something. And she let me test it out on the spot and download some photos and check it all and put it through. So that worked kind of pretty well.
Yeah, the
There's quite a
backstory
lot
is
of
really important too, and you can often, when you meet someone in person, you can kind of gauge how genuine they are about the reason for sale and things like that too. So you really can't substitute for that.
The flip side of that is in my very, very early days, like 15 years ago, I actually bought a bunch of equipment sometimes off cash converters. As silly as that sounds, this is before I was investing in high-end camera gear. They actually have a 3-month warranty behind anything that goes out the shop door. And they usually test things to some extent. That's a real sketchy way to do it. The next probably best thing is something like Michael's in Melbourne has a very large secondhand repertoire, and they have a whole window that you can go in and just see layers and layers and layers and layers, all different models and types. And they're not as they're a bit more expensive, but they back up their sales as well, and they've tested all the equipment. I think my latest 51.4 I got from there, for instance. And Hobart has a couple of little small ones, but not a very big range. But some stores have secondhand resale, and that's actually probably somewhere where I would definitely consider.
Yeah, it's sort of
And
been
it's,
vetted by the retailer there,
yeah,
so
they
that
back it up a bit.
yeah. I mean, we had a question on YouTube about what the best secondhand gear market is. There's actually a couple I can think of.
There is a Canon specific Facebook one that's quite
Yeah, the
large.
Facebook pages is probably one area but I still think it would be a good idea to make sure if you can see it in person first. There's still scams that operate on Facebook and things like that. Even though you can see their face and everything, it doesn't mean that things are going to work out your way. But that's definitely one way. I personally find when I sell things, I just do a post on Facebook, and generally it's a friend or someone I know that picks it up, and often someone that selling stuff, you at least know something of where it's come from, and if they're reputable. I bought a few lenses off Gumtree in the past where, in fact, I did quite recently. I bought a Samyang 135mm f2 to try some deep space astrophotography with. And I did a bit of shopping around on Gumtree and waited for one to come up. And you can even do an alert, like if one comes up, and there was actually a couple for sale in Hobart. And I just went around to the guy's place, and he was a lovely bloke. And yeah, nothing wrong with it really. And it was all pretty straightforward. So that's how I would go about it.
Another brand link to consider is the Sigmas. Have long, in recent years anyway, really upped their game and created some fantastic value for money lenses. Like I'm actually using the 35 1.4 Sigma art lens, and that whole art range is for quite a few years now has been considered one of the best bang for buck sort of value sort of lens versus quality ranges out there, and I've used the 85 for aerials as well. It's a bit heavy, but it's a beautiful sharp lens. Their 50mm art lens is also pretty brilliant. So if you're you don't necessarily need to be fixed on your brand, and if say something like this one's sort of out of your league, which it kind of is brand new, it's freaking expensive, 2.3 or 2.4 or
Is that
something.
an 85, 1.8? Those pretty good.
1.4, 85 1.4.
Oh, there's a 1.8 that's even not that bad.
Well, that's actually what I started with.
Yeah.
And this is it here. And to be perfectly honest, I know professional studios that use this, and the results are beautiful. Because when you think about portraiture in particular, it doesn't need to be that sharp. In fact, in some ways, it is an advantage to have a bit of a creamier, softer look about it. So it's probably half the weight, half the size, and the results are beautiful. It doesn't have IS built in, but it's at 1.8 you don't necessarily need it. So this was a bit of a, do I really, which is why I didn't go full price on this, because I couldn't quite justify it. But getting a really good price second hand off someone that I trusted, and saving, $900 or whatever, it was, I was like, you know what, I'm going to treat myself. And
You would have got so many aerial zingers from that lens.
oh
That,
yeah, I've got some cookers, absolute cookers.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's well and truly justified it from that perspective.
And funny enough, that in terms of, if people ask me what I use for my aerials for quite a few years, it's been fixed 35 and fixed 85. And I have 2 cameras and 2 lenses, and those are it. Reason being, by being 1.4 or 1.8 sort of lenses, I can open them right up and keep the shutter speeds really high, and not have to compromise on much else. And whereas using an f4 lens, that's a lot of stops of light I'm not getting into that lens. And I sometimes find myself having to compromise the ISO much higher than I want to, or I get tempted to bring the shutter speed down to make up for it, and then I end up getting blurry shots. So you lose the flexibility of compositionally, obviously, with a fixed lens, but you make up for it in the image quality, which is often sharper, with particular reasonable quality kind of fixed focal lenses.
You're lucky that you shoot top down, because I think at 1.4 and an oblique shot, you might have a few problems. And
Yeah, oblique. But I'm only shoot top down. That's one of the issues as well. But I just did an entire 3-hour aerial shoot about a month ago, or maybe even less, actually, 3.5 weeks ago, on the new 24-105 RF, and I was actually really happy. And I was a bit like, oh, this is going against my religion here. I want the glass, on that kind of caliber sensor. But I really wanted to see how much that 8 stops of image stabilization was going to help. And I really wanted to experiment in terms of, going lower down on my shutter speeds. And I was shooting at 1/800th and going fine. And I know Lukey loves that lens for his aerials, because he does a lot of oblique shots in particular, as I tend to focus straight down, where it's a bit of it. There's less of an issue having that smaller aperture. But I mixed it up on that one, and it was the first time in a while I've used a zoom lens where I was like, you know what, this is, because it's native to that lens, you get the best performance.
Yeah, no, definitely, and certainly some great info. And you
portraiture, wow, these 85s. And the other flip one for portraiture that also has a versatility in macro is the 100mm macro in the Canon. There's an older 2.8 and a newer 2.8 IS, and they're both sharp as a tack. And they're actually brilliant portrait lenses, like really good portrait lenses, which I didn't even think of at first, as well as being excellent macros. And the new IS one has like a 3-axis kind of stabilization, so which is pretty handy when you're getting down low and using such sort of shallow depths of field. But that was, did you ever use that one, Lukey, in your Canon days?
Yeah, I owned the 100mm original, the non-IS or non-L macro, and that's brilliant in its own right, just for the price point. I think you can buy it for like $500, and it's bloody amazing. But
that's another sweet spot sort of lens.
Yeah, it's kind of like a no-brainer if that's what you're trying to get into with Canon, and you don't have a big budget. I currently have the Sony 90mm macro, which is also an absolutely amazing lens. And yeah, it's funny you were sort of saying that, because I was thinking, oh, maybe I should get a portrait lens as well, and sort of hadn't really considered that would make a fantastic portrait lens in its own right. So that's a really good way of going. If you're wanting to get into macro, you've sort of almost buying yourself a portrait lens at the same time.
Yeah, that was a bonus. Look, you had a couple of questions about insurance. And also, this is an interesting one, that some insurers don't cover using a gear outside.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be careful, I guess, who you choose as an insurer. And it kind of comes down to as well if you're operating professionally or even semi-professionally versus just doing more of a hobbyist sort of style. And generally, if you're just a hobbyist, you can probably get away with house and contents insurance. Just have to check the terms and conditions or the what do they call it, the PDS, and make sure that they do actually cover photographic equipment. Sometimes you have to list it as an additional valuable. Just make sure you're not underinsured, because that need to make sure that that's sometimes I think if the value of what you need to claim is above a certain amount, you actually have to list it as its own thing, and that'll mean it costs a bit more for your premium, but you obviously want to be covered. So
I've used
that's generally going to be
RACT.
cheaper. But the minute that you start being professional and you're selling your work, I don't think you'd find too many sort of insurers that do the house and contents that will actually insure you professionally. They'll generally say you need professional photography insurance for that. And so for me, I obviously use professional photography insurance. It was a bit of a it was a challenge to have to go to that after being so used to covering everything under house and contents. But and basically they could look. If you had it under your house and contents and you made a claim, they could look up on the web, which they probably do, and they could see that you have a website selling prints, and then they can turn around and go, well, hey, you're operating professionally. Our insurance doesn't cover professionals, so therefore you're not covered. So technically, I guess if you're selling your products, that technically means you're professional. Sometimes I guess they might have a certain value that you need to be earning a year, but it's very well worth understanding that so you don't get into any pickles. But I use Aon currently. I have used PPIB as well in the past. To be honest, I use Aon mostly because they cover drones and they can cover drones and public liability all in the one premium. And I don't have to actually list every single item I have. I just have to make sure that the total value of all my items adds up and I have good records of everything I've bought, etc. So for me, that makes it very easy and flexible. But it gets pretty expensive as a premium, but obviously well worth.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. As soon as I think you're making money, they charge you more money, even though it's the same equipment.
I couldn't do it. Like you just consider, like you sort of after a while you get used to all the gear you have, and then you kind of look at your bag, and then you sort of do the sums in your head of how much value that bag actually is sitting on the ground, and you're like, okay, wow, okay, and I'm pretty glad I have insurance. So it's definitely it's something you probably take for granted, and it's probably a hard thing to pay the bill, but if something went wrong and you lost your whole bag, for me, that's a pretty big kick in the teeth. If
I do know a few professional photographers have actually decided it's not worth it, and for the amount of times they need it, I must pay like $1,300 a year by the time I add up all my insurances, and I might not have made a claim for 7 years. So that's almost $9,000-$10,000 that I've spent and I've got nothing back. But if I lost my whole kit, that'd be $40,000 or $50,000 that I'd be out. So it's a bit. It's a bit of a trade-off. So I do insure. I use AIS, which was recommended at the time by the RPP and a few other photographers. If you're an RPP member, you can get a discount with some of the carriers. I think maybe PPIB and maybe Aon.
Yeah.
My one, I do need to itemize. Some of them do and don't cover world travel. That's a little bit less of an issue after this year. But that was one of the points that separated them. And some of them will and won't cover drones. Which is a bit of a point of contention. That's changing a little bit, and some of them are just brokers basically, where they're just searching around for the best deal for you. So it's not a straight answer with that, but if you're not doing professionally, home and contents is way more affordable. I think I added like a personal effects or something, because some of them won't cover stuff in your car unless you have something specific about that, and quite often that's the most likely place you're going to lose things. And most insurance companies are very, very hesitant to cover stuff in cars. Because that's probably where most of the claims come from.
It definitely is. There's policies where they won't pay out if you over a certain amount if you leave your stuff in the car overnight and stuff. I guess it's probably straightforward, but you could.
Or it's not parked on private property.
And leave it in the car, and then something did happen. And I have had some stuff taken from the car once, many years ago, and it's a terrible experience. And so you definitely want to make sure you're covered in those sort of instances. The other thing's probably worth mentioning is if you are flying a drone and you're earning money from that, it's a very good idea to have public liability insurance actually on the drone itself, which isn't actually terribly cheap, but it's something really well worth looking into. Or, you know, and then obviously public liability insurance for any sort of business activities or things like that. I think that was the main thing. And generally, drone excesses are very, very expensive. So even if you lose the drone, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get, you know, all of the money back. And I don't know how I know that, but yeah, it's definitely not a cheap
Oh, Luke,
exercise.
I almost went there, mate.
Yeah, so that's the other thing to consider, but still
So the other thing with drone is, and this is where a lot of people are going to get caught out if they don't read the fine print, you can get the insurance that comes with a Mavic or
the
a
DJI
DJI
refresh. Yep.
Called Refresh, which is actually worth getting. I think it's $170 or something.
Yeah,
And
it
that
depends
gives
on the
you
drone.
2 replacements in 1 year. But the fine print is you have to physically mail that drone to them and all the bits of it. So if you lose it in a tree, you're stuffed. If it drops in the water, you're stuffed. So if you physically can't hand them back the actual drone, you're not covered for anything. And a lot of people don't realize that when they get that insurance, and they think they're covered when actually they're only covered if they manage to have it in their hot little hand.
Yeah, but it's definitely worth having, irrespective of that, because you're never going to be able to get an insurance policy outside of DJI that's anywhere near as cost effective as that. So
Yeah.
in some ways, you actually need to have 2 insurance policies. Unfortunately, you need to have one
both,
that covers the drone for a total loss scenario, and one that covers the drone if you can sort of get bits and pieces of it back. And and you can actually even extend that too out to 3 years, which I'd probably consider doing, because it's definitely a lot cheaper to pay 170
I didn't realize that. I
bucks
think it
than
extended. I think
$1,000
I added.
excess on a drone claim. So yeah,
Like I paid for the following year, I think, to add another year, but it won't give you 2 more. It only gives you what you haven't already
oh, is
claimed.
that right?
I claimed for 1 last year, and you get 2. And even though I'm paying the same amount of money, it's only covering the 1. So
Okay, so you only
yeah.
get 2 across the whole lifetime. It's just that you can extend it out if you've
I'm not sure about 3 years. Like, yeah, I haven't looked at it
okay.
for a while, but when I went to extend it beyond 1 year, they said you already claimed once. We're only going to cover you once,
Okay,
even
I'll
though
have
you're
to look
paying the
into
same
that.
amount for the new
Well,
year.
2 years, to be honest, these days with what do they call it, planned obsolescence or whatever, with everything
Yeah.
turning over, 2 years is probably a long time to have a drone for these days. So yeah, so that's insurance covered there. I'm very risk averse, so I always try and make sure everything is.
It's good. It's lots to be said for peace of mind.
Yeah, well, I
Try
just
to
don't
say
want to
trust in God,
just want
but
to
tie up your
not have to think
camel.
about it. What was that?
Trust in God, but tie up your camel. It's an old saying. Like, hope for the best, but cover your butt as well. Tim, I thought you were falling asleep there for a second, mate. You still with us?
I think there's a bit of a connection speed thing going on.
We just lost Fujiko. She had the best backdrop. It was beautiful. I was going to comment on that. I got Mr. Cooper. How are you, Timmy? Hey, Fujiko. Beautiful. I want one of those shots.
We'll probably talk a bit about tripods and that kind of kit as well. I forgot to actually bring one in with me, but I normally use. I'm an ambassador for Sarui, so again, disclosure, etc. But Sarui, for me, after doing a lot of research, was the brand that I actually used, and then I actually almost spoke to them about working with them, because I really like their product so much. So it was very genuine in terms of why I deal with them. But
very good price point.
That's sort of, for the value for money, it's pretty hard to. I found it hard to beat. I use the W1204 for really long hikes, because it's a waterproof tripod that's very lightweight. The 2204 for sort of more car trips and maybe overnighters, where I don't have to carry the tripods quite so far. And then I have a R series tripod, which is quite big and heavy, and that's more for car jobs. So I'm actually a big advocate of having more than one tripod. Surprise, surprise. And I guess it's certainly, if you're going to go walking or doing a lot of backcountry stuff, you probably want a more lightweight tripod. And if you're going to be car based, you definitely want a more heavyweight tripod, especially if it's windy.
Or if you're Nick Monk, you just have a heavy one.
Yeah,
Take
some
it
people
freaking everywhere.
Nick has a beast of a tripod and just takes it everywhere. It doesn't want to compromise, and I guess that's the thing. If you go hiking and you're in the backcountry, you can take whatever you like. You just have to carry it there. So, and that's Nick's attitude. He doesn't want to compromise, and I respect him for that. But
But
yeah,
he's also his tripod's worth about as much as my car.
it's not
It's
a cheap
really
tripod.
white stuff is pretty much renowned as the best of the best
Oh yeah, that's the
as far
beauty.
as tripod legs go. But you can pay thousands of dollars just for the legs alone.
Yeah, and his can extend to taller than he is, and yet it's very functional and very easy to use. So he's got it's a very good investment. And the thing is, it would have cost him a fortune, but he might have gone through 3 other cheaper brand tripods in the same time, and so you sort of end up at the same in the same point
Yeah,
after
he
a
might
while.
have that thing for 20 years, like
Yeah, definitely. So
I in the early days, really early days, I was using Manfrotto, and I had the simple aluminium like 190 dB or whatever, which was their classic like 15 years ago. Then I tried a carbon fiber version. They tend to have the clip legs, which are quite fast, but I've actually moved now to more the screw legs.
I found the clip legs. If you get any salt water in them and you don't wash it out properly, which
It's
I have to admit
bad.
I'm not the best at, they just rust up so quickly that you really if you're going to use a flip locks near salt water, it's probably not a good idea. And they also fill up with water very easily as well. Um,
Yeah.
Also,
Oh,
Aaron's showing
what's
us
Aaron got
one on
there,
his
mate?
screen.
He's got his
Um,
clips.
yeah,
Look out. I bet are they clean,
so you have
Eric?
to be
Are
really
they
careful
clean?
with that, and the springs will pop out and things like that. So it can get quite expensive to replace them. But that's more of a long term thing.
So that's the kind of screw leg equivalent.
Yeah,
Um, you think they're going to be slower than the clips because you think clips are really fast. In fact, if there's enough weight in them, you unclip it and it just falls down.
yeah,
But if you do these both at the same time and then it drops, it does something similar. So the 1204, that I've actually got the same 1204 as Lukey, and it's weather sealed, so you feel a bit more confident around the ocean and in the water of not getting stuff in. I think on the smaller tripods, they can often flip up on themselves, so you can get the
yeah.
physical length down a lot more. So I actually had one. I had what's the Italian brand?
Manfrotto or the
No, a bit more high end than that.
Jitsu.
Gitzo, yeah,
Gitzo, yeah.
Gitzo.
Thank
So I had a
you.
Gitzo Traveler, which was thank you for Chico. It's and that was amazing for traveling around the world. So they're really well made and super super light, and that flipped up on itself. So I actually fit that inside my day pack, not even outside, actually inside once I took the head off. So if I was, there's a lot of places that I went to shoot where you're not allowed tripods, or as soon as you pull a tripod out, or they see you've got one, all the security guards start going a bit weird, or people start looking at you funny. So and this, we'll get into this later in bags. So I actually try and set myself up as commando style as possible, that no one's necessarily going to think I'm a photographer. I got the beefier one, which is this one, Lucky. Just got this a couple of months ago. Is that the 2204? What's that one?
No, I think it's a 3 series. That one. It's a
It's bigger than
3
that, isn't it?
R3 something. But yeah, that what I like about that one is it's got the center column as well, so you can either use it as a version without the center column, which some people like, and then you can also use it with a center column and gives you extra height as well. So I don't mind center columns. Some people are really anti center columns because they can reduce the stability a little bit of the tripod. But yeah, you just have to keep an eye on it. Make sure you've always got that tightened down just under the ball head there to make sure that there's no wiggle in the actual center column.
So it's a
Should be right.
little bit about maintenance. Like I was sick of having a tripod that, like you said, that I had to extend to get to eye height. So I want it. So this one goes to eye height without any extension, and I can take that center column out and just use a flat panel on the top as well. But it's kind of solid enough, this one, that when I raise the head in kind of lowish winds, I'm still quite confident with it. And so yeah, it's getting a bit on the heavy side for walking. So I've got the 1204 for that. But in terms of having it in the car and all my commercial work and stuff as well, and the confidence of doing landscapes. If I went out later tonight to do astro, which is sort of
Getting
maybe on the
Aurora.
cards, for
Yeah.
instance, I'm like happy days. And I've lost quite a lot of shots over the years to instability in tripods because I've compromised by having the lighter weight and the travelability because I travel a lot. And it's bit me on the bum a few times, I have to say. So it's definitely a trade-off, weight versus versatility. in terms of travel in particular. So I'm with Lukey now that I feel really good having a couple of choices. I even got some little teeny ones as well that I just kind of have in the car the whole time in case I need to do something on the spot.
Yeah, they're nice for setting up little time lapses or things like that, little tabletop
And I
tripod.
remember when I first met Lukey, he was the kind of guy he'd have a time lapse running on one tripod while he was doing his other shooting anyway. So he was functionally using both at the same time quite a lot, which is not what everyone does. But at least it gives you the choice to maybe start going there if you have a couple. And I think
or you can use it to hold a light or microphone or whatever sort of other things you're doing as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can some of them have different sort of ways they extend out the leg sideways. Some of them splay a little bit different. They get lower for like really close up.
Yeah, one feature I've used more recently, which is quite interesting, is actually inverting the center column and setting up the camera upside down essentially, and it means you can get very close to the ground. And most cameras will actually recognize it's upside down and actually correct it the right way anyway. And so that's actually another thing you can do to get really close to the ground is actually invert it. You have to be careful you don't accidentally let it drop straight through, but some tripods will allow you to do that, and I think that's a really, really good feature because getting really close to the ground, you can really work up reflections and just different textures in the foreground that gives you a really unique perspective. Even you can't even get that low even if you splay all the legs all the way out. You've still got a good sort of 10 centimeters sitting on top of the tripod there, so well worth trying out to see if it's possible. Yeah,
Aaron's got the 2204, which is a really good down the middle all rounder. Really, it's slightly more on the solid side than the 1204s for walking, but it's pretty stable and really good bang for the buck. And it's one of the waterproof versions as well.
If I could get only one, the 2204 sort of size would be the one to get. You can still manage to carry it longer distances. It's heavy enough for everything that unless it's seriously windy. And it's very versatile. So that would be my number one pick. Obviously, it's very serially oriented, but anything that sort of size would do a really great job, I think. Depending on how tall you are, I'm obviously a bit taller, so that does have an impact in terms of what choice you might make as well. Yeah.
So slight segue, but one of the things that I haven't been able to use for a long period of time because I've had too light a tripod is this fandangled bunch of business. So this is actually a multi-row panel head by Really Right Stuff, which was actually freaking expensive. And I got it in America. So this
that'd be worth a fortune.
This is a pano head, which is brilliant for stitching. And basically Luke can explain it technically better, but it basically if you're doing panos where the foreground's quite close or you're trying to get foreground in,
parallax error. Yeah,
you get parallax error if you don't. I mean, software is so clever these days; you can actually get away with doing a lot by hand.
Yeah,
or even just on an average tripod.
Is to the camera. Yeah,
you basically adjust the camera's position relative to what focal length you're using to make sure that it's pivoting on the exact central point. Whereas most cameras, you've got it sort of up on the end, so to speak, on the tripod, and the actual sensor's right here, so it's moving when you rotate it. And the idea is to keep it, equidistant, so you don't have parallax error. And the reason why I bought this fandangled extension, this allows you to do panos with a horizon is exactly in the middle. But a lot of my favorite shots aren't like that. Like I want the foreground to be 2/3 of the shot with just a bit of horizon on top, and this doesn't really work. So a multi-row pano kind of sets it up a bit like this, that allows you to actually tilt the axis and actually do a pano without parallax error at whatever sort of thirds ratio that you want. But by the time I put this on, it's probably tripling the sensitivity to movement and the wind, and it's really, really vulnerable to that. So if you haven't got a heavy tripod, then good luck, or no wind at all. So now I'm sort of like, all right, I can probably use this thing now that I've had for 2 years, or actually probably 5 years. And the other reason I bought this is because, well, I can't afford a phase one. So if I have to do a job where I've got to stitch something really big, now I can do it. So it was kind of like my compromise investment, assuming the light doesn't change through your night exposures, of course. But it's another thing to consider in terms of what you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've got this one too. It's the Nodal Ninja, which is a slim one. So it's fairly small and lightweight and compact. and all of that kind of thing. But I have to admit,
and more affordable, I think.
yeah,
I
and they're pretty well
Dixon was
built.
using that
They're
for
pretty
years.
rugged and all of that, so they're worth looking at as well. But what I just tend to find I don't pack it with me because I'm not a pano sort of person. I tried to get into it. I really wanted to do astro panos, which do look amazing, but I'm just not a, some people are born to love doing panos, and it's not that I don't love it, but it's not my preference, and so I generally don't take that unless I'm sort of forcing myself to use it. So, but there's certainly some great options out there to look into for doing panos. And you set it up right, and you can use software like PT GUI or even Lightroom to stitch it all together, and you wouldn't really know it was a stitch. So that's the whole idea of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'll do about that.
Maybe we'll talk a bit about the filters, but this is the Nissi. I'm also a Nissi ambassador, so sorry about the Nissi stuff. But
just call him Mr. Ambassador.
Yeah. This is a the 150 kit, which has just been released, the S6. So I've got this to play with for the
12-24.
The new 12 to 24, yeah. But ordinarily, I wouldn't like it. I do find the size big, but being able to use 12 millimeters, 12 millimeters versus 16 millimeters is a massive difference. And so I do actually feel like for certain situations, it's well worth the added bulk. The other option, of course, is that you can actually retrofit a rear mount filter system into these cameras as well. And so I've actually got a set of rear mount filters that's significantly smaller. And so those rear mount filters can actually just be slotted in the back of the lens, and you can get, I think this one goes up to 10 stops, and so obviously you can't really do grads in the back of the lens, but it allows you to rather than carry these massive huge filters, you can just put these in the back. Probably not quite as good image quality, but there's a massive difference in terms of the size and usability. A lot of people say rear filters aren't a good idea because your sensor's being exposed while you put it in, but you just put a body cap on the camera while you're doing that, and there's no problem in terms of the sensor getting dirty. So that's a little thing that I've found more recently, which has been really interesting. In terms of that, and I think you can get rear mount filters for a lot of the other lenses too, like the 14 to 24 and others. You can retrofit a holder into the back of the lens if that's your kind of thing.
But I was going to ask you how common is it? I didn't think it was that common. It's very lens specific to be able to do that, isn't it?
Well, it is lens specific, so they need to have the kits made for that particular lens. But for example, the new Sigma 14 to 24 that's come out has actually got a lens, rear mount filter slot already in there, ready to accept those filters. And then you can just buy an aftermarket filter and put it in there. And so it sort of makes it much more practical to have those size lenses, because it's actually not too hard then to be able to do long exposures with them. It does change, of course, if you want to do use a polarizer. You sort of still need to use a front mount filter for that, but it can get away with it in terms of long exposures if that's your thing. So that's pretty good.
So I guess in the big picture of lenses, there's two options. There's the fit-on, sheet-based ones, or there's screw-ons, and there's pros and cons to both. I'll let Lukey finish.
Oh, that's all right. These are the pocket pouches that I've used for all of the screw-on filters. So they come in. I always get 82 mils. I think it's a really good idea to try and invest in the largest possible size you think you'd ever use, and generally that's 82 mil. And just get a whole set of 82.
Size adapters are really cheap.
And then they normally are the most expensive one. But the problem is that, but you can use a step-up ring to put it onto smaller lenses. Otherwise, you're going to keep buying different size filters, and you're going to end up having a drawer full of 77s and 72s, and one's a CPL and one's a polar, one's a ND, and it just gets out of control. But if you just have one set of one set of something, and adapt that, then at least things are you're not doubling up everywhere. So that's But I
Okay,
do.
what do you say the main pros and cons between the fixed flat filter systems and the screw-ons?
Oh, for me, portability for the screw-ons is definitely a massive factor. So if I was going to go hiking for a big trip, I wouldn't generally take big flat filters because they're quite big and heavy, bulky, and take up space. Whereas I can throw something like this in my pack, and this will have like a 6-stop, a 10-stop, a polarizer, and maybe a UV protector filter if I think that there's going to be potential damage to the lens, and then I can adapt that on any of the lenses I use using the step up rings. So it sort of covers me for all bases just in one little pouch like that. Whereas if I took the flat filters, I'd need the holder, and then you need the box with all the filters, and you hope they don't break in the bag because they're big glass sheets. So I think it's much more practical from a travel perspective to have these. They've got their own problems, like they can quite often get fused to the front of your lens,
Yeah, it's
and
quite
so
common.
it's a good idea to
All
get.
the adapter rings can fuse as
Yeah,
well quite easily.
yeah, they can get stuck. So it's always a good idea to have what's called a filter wrench. So these actually don't get a plastic one, get a metal one. These can actually go around your filter, and then you just crank it, and that'll actually take it off without you damaging
Yeah,
anything.
Luke saved my
Um,
bacon the other day with one of those, and I'd never even
yeah,
heard of one before.
yeah, the filter wrench is a very, very good idea. And it's one of those things that if you don't get one, you kind of wish you got one when the problem happens. That's the problem. So I have a little like sort of almost looks like a toiletries bag, but I got this little bag in my bag, and it's just got stuff like the filter wrench. It's got some extra caps for the filters. It's got bum caps for the camera. It's got I've got some swabs for cleaning the sensor. Yeah, spare caps for the lenses, that sort of stuff, just so that if something happens, batteries, if something happens, then I've got all of that there with me, and it just lives in the bottom of my bag, so I don't. The main thing is to remember to replenish it if you use it. But yeah, that's a really good sort of little bag to have, of all those little knickknacks that you don't really think of at the time are that important, but then you get a big, huge thing on your sensor, and you're halfway through a trip in Iceland or something, and you don't have any sensor swabs, and there's no camera stores around. Those sort of things. You quickly learn are actually very important. Not that actually happened to me, by the way, but that some of those little tiny things can make such a massive difference in those trips. So that's.
I had the early Lee kit, which kind of was a precursor. I think Sing were a really good quality system as well in those days. But I found they're really big
Yeah.
panel. They're really easy to get to dirty up and constantly having to clean them. But the versatility comes when you want to use combinations of filters. That's where they really exceed
Yeah,
themselves.
the grad filters, it's really hard to, if you're using graduated ND filters, it's hard to go past the sort of flat filter system. You really can't do that with a screw-on filter. So
When I've actually tried, I've physically held up a grad filter in front of the lens by hand, and you can kind of do it, but it's a little bit shaky and it's really hassle with a long exposure. But I've gone the compromise. I've done the screw filter thing at 82 mil because my widest focal length is 82, and I have 77 and 72. And with the step rings, I can just put them straight on. I have had problems with them sticking to each other. I just opened this up the other day, and actually one of mine's broken in the middle, my 15 stop. But probably the best bang for buck out there at the moment, and I've got to thank Lukey for pointing it out, was the long exposure filter kit that Nissi does. And I think I got 4 or 5. I got a 3-stop, 6-stop, which is actually a 6-stop combination polarizer, which is brilliant, and 10-stop and 15-stop together in one kit at like 82. And that pretty much covers everything I'm going to need. And by having a built-in polarizer to the 6-stop, and I've mixed them together, and I put the 10-stop with the 6-stop together, and I put the 6 and the 3 together to make 10 stops, and vice versa. And I have actually done a reasonable job of mixing them together, but it's super light, portable, and pretty easy. They do come with, the step rings are only like $15 or something, but I think Lukey pointed out that it might be worth investing in a brass
yeah, if you can get
brass
a
one or something, because they do
non-aluminium
stick.
step ring, if you can find one, they're pretty hard to find. But if you can use brass or something that's built a little bit better, if you're using different metals on each other, then it's less likely to stick to each other. So I've actually got for my 77, I've got a brass one, which very rarely causes me any problems. So it's well worth looking into. It's just might cost a lot for a piece of metal, but it's more about frustration and all of that. When you're in the field, the last thing you want to do is have that.
But yeah, if you're a bit shy on your filters and you're interested in long exposure in particular, that's a pretty nice Christmas present, I reckon.
Yeah, it's a pretty cost-effective
long
way of
exposure
getting
filter
into long
kit.
exposures for sure. If your lenses
Way cheaper than buying them individually, getting them as that kit.
Yeah, definitely. And all of, and Nissi often have sales. A lot of the other brands often have sales too, where you can pick up a whole bunch of good stuff at good prices.
What do you think about buying, say, like one of those flat filter kits secondhand, Lucky?
What was that, mate?
What do you think about buying, say, one of those classic like V5, V6 Nissi filter kits secondhand?
Yeah, I would. If everything looks pretty good quality, I don't see why not. I wouldn't buy it online. I'd buy it in person. But definitely in terms of I wouldn't. Yeah, if it's not all scratched up and functional, I think that shouldn't be a problem. But it's pretty unlikely you're going to find a set of filters that doesn't have a few dings in it or something like that. So you set your expectations low, I think, and be pleasantly surprised if it turns out better than it is.
So look, you've got these. You always carry around these little wiper things. What
yeah, I was going to talk about that. I used to always find it really frustrating cleaning filters, especially the big flat ones. But if you can get yourself some Kim wipes or something like that, I actually got put onto them by Dylan Toe, who I think got put onto them by someone in the US. But they essentially they're just a lint-free tissue, which same for cleaning glasses or anything like that, but you can just get them in bulk. So, if I'm going on a trip, I'll pull out 10 of them and put them in a snap-lock bag. And then I've got a little supply with me on the road. And then you get some residual oil remover. It's probably my favorite. There's other lens cleaning solutions too, but this one sort of actually, as the name suggests, it actually removes the oils from because, a lot of the smudges and things are from your fingers, which is oils. So you want something that's going to, like, it has mild detergent in it, and it's actually going to wash that off. So this stuff's actually really expensive for what it is. But and you just put 2 or 3 drops on the filter, get a Kim wipe and rub it over. And honestly, that's pretty much all you have to do. Whereas if you're using a microfiber, you smudge it that way and then you smudge it that way. And it used to do my head in trying to get things clean. Microfibers aren't a good idea generally because they soak up all of the oils from your fingers. And then you're just smearing those oils all over the place. And they also can get some, grit in them if you're storing them in your bag. And then you're just wiping all that grit over your lenses and over your filters and things. So definitely.
And I just, this is my wiper right here. I wear icebreakers.
That's probably
and they're
better
really
than a
nice.
microfiber, to be honest, because you don't often the microfibers. Yeah, they'll just collect everything. So yeah, I'm a bit anti them at the moment, but they've got their place, of course. But yeah, I think that nothing's really going to beat the tissue like that, or something similar. Or some people will look at little alcohol swabs. I think Zeiss does them, but I haven't found them as good as this. Obviously, the main thing though is if you do this, make sure you dispose of the tissues responsibly as well when you're out in the field.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely. It's a small little thing, but it's all about sort of zapping annoyances. And one of the biggest annoyances for me for a long time was cleaning optics, and now that's just not a problem anymore, which is pretty cool.
I'm still not game enough to clean my sensors, so
yeah, it's pretty scary, but
it's a bit
you
of
save
a
a lot of money.
confidence
Yeah, I was very anti it for a long time, but also down here in Tassie, it's not quite so easy to get done professionally.
No, that's true.
And also, you might be on a trip and you don't have access to it, and they're really there's enough. Like I mentioned before, there's something really significant on there that you need to address.
It's pretty empowering to take that leap, I think.
Yeah, it is, but yeah, you do need to be very careful and follow the instructions and make sure I think most of the time it's go one way, then go back the other way, and that's it kind of thing. And then maybe once a year I'll send a camera in for service and they can do a full proper clean and all of that sort of thing. But you're only going very lightly across the surface, front and back. There's no pressure or anything required. It's all.
So look, you're pretty on top of your storage as well. I think partly because you came from a warm, sort of moist environment up north. But what are your suggestions in terms of how people store their equipment?
Well, when I was living in Sydney, I noticed where I was keeping my gear, my bag always felt a little bit damp. I was going out a lot, shooting at beaches, and so my gear was getting wet or moist quite a lot. And so what I decided to do was get a dry cabinet. It's certainly not something you probably need down in Tasmania, because the air's a lot drier down here. But I think the thing you do have to consider, of course, is that a lot of people are actually storing their camera gear in their bags, and sometimes the bags have moisture, and that might actually be the best environment to store them. So it's probably better to have it on a shelf, if anything, in your room rather than in your bag. I'm still guilty of storing stuff in my bag if I'm between
I'm
jobs.
looking around in my bags and they're full of lenses, but I do have silicon gel packs in them as well.
Yeah, that's what I've started to do as well, actually. All of the little pockets in the bag, I've got silica gel sachets. You can pick up them really inexpensive, and does mean my bag sort of shakes. It sounds a bit like a maraca or something when I put it up and down. But but it's great because then that's sort of just absorbing any residual moisture that's in there, and then I'll just change out those silica gel sachets every kind of few months or whenever I feel like the bag's starting to get more moist. If you're in a really humid area, then that might not last too long. But I think it's just a nice thing to be able to do, given how inexpensive they are. Again, make sure that they're disposed of properly.
So speaking of bags, Loki, do you want to head into that, segue into that one?
What I was going to show is actually a little thing that I've found recently in terms of storing batteries and SD cards.
Oh yeah.
I've got this little box here, and what it actually is it stores two batteries and all of the SD cards there as well. So basically, and then I've got a little silica gel sachet wedged in here as well. So I've sort of retrofitted it a little bit so that I can fit my batteries in properly. But what it means is I've got two batteries and all of the SD cards that I need. It's got a weather sealed gasket there, and then I can just click that, and then I've got all of my batteries and cards all in one place. And I've got, my name all over it. You don't want to lose all the SD cards, but I've never felt more comfortable about how I keep my batteries and cards when I'm out on a shoot. And I obviously make sure I keep that in a pocket that's all zipped up and never going to fall out, generally in the inside of the bag, of course. So just thought I'd share that, because that sort of solution, and then if I go hiking, I can just leave that in the pack as well. So, and it's a really great little thing. It costs like $15, but
and they're very robust as well, physically.
Yeah, weather sealed. So yeah, it's a good way.
I think I might put one of those on my Christmas list, Lucky.
Well, they fit the Canon batteries really well. Actually, the cutouts are made for Canon batteries, but you can also fit Sony Z series in there as well. I'm sure the Nikon's probably fit as well. So that brand's JJC, but you might be able to find others as well around. So that's what I was going to mention about that. But yeah, the bag, I use a f-stop bags. So I think you've recently got an f-stop bag too, Paul.
I don't know where that fell out of the sky, Lucky.
I sold one of my old bags to Paul because I felt.
Yeah, I get the Luke Sharkey hand-me-downs.
No, it's no, I think it's nice to be able to share the joy that is f-stop with other people.
I mean, I haven't bought them because they're really expensive, but I've been jealous of the system for ages, and they've been the bag of choice for a lot of kind of expedition travel photographers for a long time, and for good reason. And I'm just going to touch up Lukey's old one, and it's got a few more years left in it, I reckon. But also, when I saw Luke's new one, I started drooling.
Yeah, it's nice. I've got the f-stop Suka, which is the sort of, I think it's meant to be 70 liters or something like that.
So
there's the ones that are commonly used is the I can't remember.
What's my one?
Agna. I don't know how to pronounce it properly, and that's about 40 liters, I think, which I've got, and that's a fantastic smaller bag for small trips. So I'd probably use that if I'm traveling interstate. And then Talopa is also very popular. It's 50 liters, and that's
what I've got, haven't I, Lucky?
Talopa is a good mix because you can generally fit that on airplanes in the overhead. So it's good storage. But I was actually surprised how much I could fit in the Agna as well. So that's still worth a look. I think the straps and everything on the Talopa is a lot better. And then
Very
The
comfortable.
the Suka that I got is much larger, but the idea with that one more so is if I want to do any overnight trips, I could probably take that rather than using a dedicated hiking pack. So that's
The
why I
thing
went
that
that way.
strikes me about this system, I mean, Luke can explain it better, but which is why I love it, is traditionally I'm the kind of person that likes to have a camera accessible all the time, and I'll whip up systems no matter what I'm doing, where I've got it ready, and even maybe a lens of choice or two. And what this system does is you can literally have a full size, 50-liter backpack full of gear, and you can keep the hip belt on, swing it around to one side, take the straps off your shoulders, and it will flip out and it will hold itself vertical off your hip.
Horizontal, yeah.
And you can literally unzip it with two hands and access all the lenses and cameras you want without even having to take the bag off or putting it on the ground. So the speed and efficiency of being able to access your equipment is fantastic. And that's to me the real standout fixture of this particular
Yeah,
system.
totally agree, Paul. That's something. If I was to go with something else, that'd be the first thing I personally look for. I know a lot of people don't actually use the bag like that, but if I'm at the beach or got water around my knees or anything like that, I can still just flip the bag down, get into what I need, and pull the bag back on again, and don't even doesn't have to touch the ground. It also means it's really good from a security perspective. No one can really get into the actual camera gear at all because
The
the
zip
zip
is
fits
actually
you
against
back,
your back, so
and
no
you're not
one's
having
going
to
to be
put the
unzipping
bag
it.
down because you can just flip it out and get it that way. So that's definitely a great feature. I'd say that's the key one for me that makes it usable.
They're also very comfortable. They're very ergonomically designed. There's a lot of flexibility in the different kind of systems and pouches you can put inside of different sizes, depending on how you want to do it. Like I've got Lucky's old one, and I've
I
actually
see
liked the
used.
fact there's a lot of room on the top. I can get all my lenses and cameras in one section, and I actually put my entire drone bag in the top in the section above that, and still fit in it, and be able to access both one from the drone from the top and the lenses from the back, without having to take it off.
Yeah, the big downside really is, I mean, they're ergonomic to an extent. They're really never going to substitute for a hiking pack or a properly designed backpack as such. And
I'm pretty impressed.
they're good, but I mean, I've got a last big walk I did with an f-stop, and I got terrible neck problem out of it. Whereas if I was using a proper backpack, it wouldn't have
On a
been a
big
problem.
walk,
So
yeah, I hear you.
so I think for longer walks and bigger trips, you definitely want to still look at a proper hiking pack. Although I'm going to
The other
try
thing I
the
like,
Tscharke and see how that goes.
the other thing I like about the Lookie is there's a big loop strap on the bottom of the bag, and I actually can put my tripod
Oh,
on the bottom.
that's something that I left on for you as a treat. They're called gators. No,
Ah,
gatekeepers.
Lukey.
Yeah, and so you can buy them as an optional extra. I have to buy some now because I gave you mine, but
Oh,
yeah,
he's good at
they
making me feel guilty.
yeah, I know that's right. Yeah, that you can extend how much can fit onto them, so that it is really good that way. There's other brands, of course. There's Shimoda that's doing really good bags. There's Atlas that are doing really good bags. I think there was another one I saw the other day. I can't remember. That are
Lopro's
doing
been
good
around
bags.
forever to do all sorts of bags. I have like a what's called a Vertex,
Yeah, that's a nice one.
which is a really good sort of all-round
Oh,
storage
crazy.
bag, but it's a little bit square and clunky. It's got a special pocket for laptops. The inside's pretty versatile.
Probably not very
There's lots of
usable
sort
as
of
a field
inside
bag.
pockets for memory cards and chargers, and like it's a good all-rounder. And I actually use it sometimes just as storage, and it's just comes under the size to be able to actually take as carry-on as well, which was another deliberate choice.
Well, we're
Because one of
thinking
the big
about.
issues now is traveling with equipment, and Luke and I come up with that quite a bit, a little bit less at the moment. And really, it's getting to the point where they're forcing you to check in your camera gear, which you can normally get away with because it didn't weigh everything you had on you. So I have one of those big, almost like fishing vests that I can actually stick like 4 lenses and 5 hard drives and a bunch of batteries in, and just have it under my jacket.
Yeah,
And I'll literally just take it off and get on the plane and chuck it somewhere.
yeah. There's the Scotty vest
Um,
as well. That's what I use.
Big
That's
jackets with big
got me through
pockets.
Iceland many times with a multitude of. I'm sure I could fit probably 4 or 5 kilos of gear in that. Couple lenses on each side and battery packs. All of my drone batteries. Sometimes they have to make you jump through a few hoops. I mean, yeah, but anyway, that helps. I don't know if I should be admitting that on YouTube or not, but anyway, that's
Oh
But
yeah,
that's how
me
you have to
neither.
do it, really. I mean, what else are you going to do? I mean, probably have to get a Pelican case and check it in and hope for the best. So,
And Lukey and I have found some really cheap sort of equivalents for just that reason. Sometimes in Bunnings or something, you can find pretty much the equivalent of a hard case for like $30 or something.
yeah, super cheap auto's got some. I don't know if you can vouch for the same quality as a Pelican, but very close. And
Like Lukey just took this one down to Franklin, and I've taken it down to Franklin, and I've taken it down
oh,
to
I
Grand
left the
Canyon.
sticker on there. Sorry, mate. I didn't realize it's got my name on there.
Oh, you did? You stuck your name on my case, you rat bag. Look at that, guys. Come on, this is what I got to deal with here.
Yeah, you put it down for 5 seconds. And
Mine, he says. And if you really, it's really important to have weather sealing on a long trip. Then maybe you probably want to invest in a pellet case. They also have this kind of like air pressure kind of set up on the side where that's probably helpful for traveling like in planes as well. I assume, Lucky.
Yeah, there's a air sort of like releases all the air pressure, so it doesn't over pressurize and then
But
break
for
the
just
seal.
traveling and having in the back of the car and getting through maybe occasional flight, there's a lot of cheaper options. Um,
Yeah, I would probably use them. I would use the cheaper ones that I found for air travel for sure. I wouldn't probably. Well, I probably wouldn't use them for something like the Franklin where they really are going to get beaten up. But for stuff where they're not really, they shouldn't really get subjected to too much. They should do the job. And I remember we could even pull a foam out of this really cheap one and put it in the Pelican case, and the foam was exactly the same. That obviously actually
yeah, it
literally
was a mirror
copied the
copy.
design. So how they got away with that, I don't know. But yeah, it's certainly opened my eyes as to what else is out there. Yeah.
So to be perfectly honest, my main camera bag is just this little beat up day
sure.
pack made by Wilderness Equipment. Wilderness Equipment makes the most bomber packs I've ever seen.
Is there any zip that still works on it, or is it?
They're all like super like YKK heavy duty
Yeah.
zips, and I actually just use a little crumpler insert on the inside, which is designed to actually put like lenses and have separators in. So I actually have my camera and maybe two lenses inside it, and it doesn't look anything like something photographic. It just looks your average person going for a day walk. And I've had 19 kilos, I think I weighed in that thing, sneaking onto a few planes. I didn't YouTube, you can't hear that. But my point is, it's really under the radar. I've actually fit one of my traveling tripods inside this, and it's only like a 35-liter day pack or something. So when I want to be under the radar, which is most of the time, that I use that a lot. And just having that 24-105 50 mil combination I talked about ready to go, sitting in a bag by the door, anytime I leave the house, basically, if I'm not actually planning a shoot and don't know if something's going to come up, that's there ready to go. And the other one that I've used to the point where, I mean, this thing, I've drowned this thing.
I was going to
I've
mention
ran
that.
over it. It's dropped off cliffs. It's been stolen by bears. Like this thing, if this thing could tell stories, seriously, unbelievable. But it's actually a little waist pack. It's called a Inverse 200 by Lowepro. So it has an over-the-shoulder strap, and it has a really nice hip belt. And I do a lot of event work, and sometimes when we go on a light hike, I'll actually have this day pack on the back, and I'll actually have this down below around my hips. And the reason being, the backpack I have for like food and extra stuff that I'm probably not going to want to access all the time. But this means I never have to sit down or take anything off. I can just whip it around to the front, around my hips, and just swap lenses or change memory cards or change batteries, and on the fly whenever I'm walking anywhere. It's super comfy. And when I do event work, I love it because everything's just all there ready to go the whole time.
I'm a big advocate of pouches as well, and one of the things that I get asked the most actually is what I use when I go out walking, and I actually use this, which they're not making anymore, unfortunately. But this is an Aquapack DSLR stormproof pouch, and all it is it's basically a nylon bag with a padded insert inside. But what it enables me to do is, while I'm hiking, have this around my neck, ready to go, and I don't have to have my all my camera gear in the main pack, because that's the last thing I want to do is put that down and have to get all of the gear out again. So and they're pretty much, they're not submersible, but they're pretty weatherproof otherwise. So if you can find something
I
like
do
that.
it. I do a similar thing where I do it a bit more on the cheap, where I just have a basic little chest pouch, I'll call it, which is just your standard kind of top loading, say low pro little bag that fits maybe a telephoto lens with maybe a small lens on the end. And you'll find that particularly with your bigger packs, you know how most bigger packs have a little chest strap across the top here? Well, you can actually clip that through the back of the bag and it sits on your chest perfectly. And it's at a beautiful height to just unzip and have ready to go. And if you've got a decent sized raincoat, which I normally do, and it starts raining, it literally fits inside my raincoat as well. So that that means I don't have to have as you know the waterproof option that Lukey has, which I think is a good one. But if you've already got
three of them.
a small case, then that's a kind of poor man's way of getting around it, I guess. The other thing I think is really significant for me is the straps that I use on the cameras.
Oh yeah.
So if you notice, that is not a short strap, but I can adjust the length of it to anything I want. And I often shoot with two cameras at once when I do my aerial photography in particular, and all the time when I do event photography or portrait photography or family shoots or documentary work or rock concerts, that kind of thing. And by having this is basically brilliant for over the shoulder, and it means that one camera can just hang on one side, and I can literally do the same with the other camera on the other side, and it's like being a gunslinger.
Yeah, because
one on each side.
It sort of rolls up the actual and
they don't touch each other, they don't get in each other's way, and you don't get strangled trying to deal with those short little neck harnesses that most cameras come with. But you can shorten it if you want. This is called a Joby Pro Sling, and it just screws on the bottom of the camera in the middle. So obviously the slight hassle is if you want to suddenly move to a tripod. But
bracket. Yeah,
I have actually put it. I actually do put it on the outside of my L bracket, and then I have both. The other thing is I've actually lost cameras by them falling down while they're on a tripod, and having one of those short little neck harnesses, and while you're working on a tripod and holding it and actually having to remain there for 30 seconds while it's taking the shot is a fast way to join a chiropractor's club. Whereas having a really long chest harness, I mean, over the shoulder harness means I've got the peace of mind of while I'm doing a long exposure to know that if it falls in, it's gonna save itself. But I can still move around and do things or reach down into a bag and that kind of thing as well. So that's kind of my personal go-to in terms of straps, because I find that the short kind of neck straps are really a bit versatile. My only compromise to that is my new R5, which came with a really special, nice, shiny strap. Which is really thick leather and it's bloody beautiful and it's so comfortable. It's ridiculous.
You're worried to start with, but I think you've grown to accept it.
I've grown to accept it, and the reason I like it also, one being incredibly comfortable, it's the perfect length to work as an extra stabilizer. So it's super comfy around my neck, and if I lock my elbows in and push the camera out to the full length of the strap, it's the perfect length to do video and use that extra pressure around my neck as a stabilizer for doing handheld video. So with that and 8-stop stabilization, I'm doing pretty damn well. So you can actually use straps as a stabilizing feature is my point.
Yeah, I've got a different, I'm pretty much in love with the Peak Designs, just for how easy you can just disconnect the actual strap and clip it back in again. And I mount one on the base of the camera and then one on the side there. And basically, and that sort of frees up the side here if I flip the screen out. That it's not getting in the way of the strap that would normally be up here, but you can leave a little tag there, little anchor there, and you can always switch to that one if you want to. So I really love that system, and that's the way to go, I reckon.
It's getting dark at your house, Aaron.
Hey,
he's gone into dark mode.
Dark mode. What have I done?
I'm just laying up, Aaron.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing I was this is a bit of show and tell now, isn't it? But this light here is pretty phenomenal.
This is the aperture?
Yeah, this is the Aperture M light. Now I do a lot of low level lighting or lighting at night time, just to simulate moonlight, and it's often very hard to do that. But what I've found with this light is that it comes with its own diffuser panel. So basically This is actually the size of it without the diffuser. It's quite small, probably pretty much the size of a pack of playing cards, actually. But what's pretty amazing about it is that you can control the white balance of the light, as well as the color. So you can control pretty much a full RGB color with it. And it actually connects to your phone via Bluetooth, and you can actually control it by your phone as well. So if I've got this sitting in a shed, and I'm shooting in the shed at night or something like that, like a boat shed, I can say, oh, what does it look like if it's red? And just on my phone, just dial in red, and then the boat shed's red, and then I can change it to green. Don't have to run back and forth to change it or anything like that. Very, very cool product. It's now my light of choice for when I'm sort of doing any night stuff. It's got some other cool functions like simulating a cop car light or lightning or other things like that, which could be cool for film or things like that as well. So yeah, it's called Aperture M. I think I got it for about 150 off Amazon, but not the cheapest light, but in terms of functionality and what you can do, you can actually also sync them up together and have multiple ones and control them all and all sorts of things. So that I think, yeah, just very, very nicely built product.
Yeah, it's funny how subtle a light actually you want it to be when you use it for light painting often. And it wasn't until I was sitting next to Lukey on Flinders Island and watching its use, I was like, I can hardly see it. And I was thinking, geez, what's this doing? And having that subtle control over the temperature is beautiful in terms of.
Yeah, you can match the color temperature to the temperature that you're shooting at. So there's no weird color shift. It looks much more natural. And a lot of lights you can't really dial right down to near zero, but this one you actually can. And so some you might have it there in the daylight and you're looking at it in your room and go, oh, that's barely on. But at night in the pitch black, it's actually super bright. And so to be able to dial it right down and use the diffuser with that, yeah, it's definitely one to rave about, which I've been doing.
Not everyone's cup of tea, but I carry one of these around quite a lot.
Oh, it's a great idea.
It works beautifully for, say, macro work, because this one has a combination of what you can see here, which is actually silver and gold together, which is my favorite for portraits, because it's straight silver is a bit cold and a bit full on in people's eyes, but it works quite well for black and white, so portrait wise. Straight white is a good all rounder, but I can zip that off and make it straight white. But it also works as what they call a scrim, which is basically a diffuser. So if you need to block direct sun and do a macro, or you want to get low and reflect some light into a mushroom or something, which is quite a common technique.
Yep.
And this is a reasonable portable size. This will fit pretty much in most of every backpack I have.
And you get smaller ones as well.
And you can get smaller ones as well for more localized purpose. But this one I take because it's actually, because I do a lot of portraiture, which obviously the show's not about, but I can do a bit of both. And sometimes I can throw light on a subject as well, set it up on a tripod and go off to the side and just light something up a little bit more, or fill in a little bit more when the contrast ratio is too high for the camera to handle, so I don't have to do HDR. So not everyone's kit, but as a portrait photographer, it's quite versatile, and it's quite fun to be able to block light as well as actually reflect light.
This would be very useful for macros, that's for sure.
We didn't really talk about tripod heads, Lukey. So
yeah, we didn't get into that, did we?
So just really quickly, this is long renowned as a really good all-rounder. This is a really right stuff BH40. And it's probably, there's a BH55, which is bigger and bombier, and probably a bit beefier. But actually, this is a really, really strong tripod head and beautifully, beautifully made. And I got this one secondhand like 6 years ago, and it's still bomber as anything. And I totally love it. It's made for Arca Swiss. And because generally really light stuff in retail is pretty expensive now, but I lived in the States for a while and earned money there, so it was quite a good investment. But Lucas got one of these and has used one.
Yeah, I'm using it right now actually to hold up my my camera.
There you go. That's all he uses it for. I'm like, come on.
Right. That's because I've tried to use it in the field, and I've found the design something that I'm not used to, I suppose. And so I use what am I using now? Markins brand. Ball heads, which are a bit of an obscure brand, and to be honest, I wouldn't buy another Markins again, even though they've been very good. I'd probably look at Acrotech. I think they're probably they look very unusual in terms of their design, but
so
they've got basically an open ball head.
Them,
so you, if anything, there's no it's not enclosed like pretty much all the other ball heads are, and so there's a lot of extra functionality that you can get from that, much more lightweight but still very strong and rugged. So that's probably the brand or the kind of design that I'd be looking at next if I could reinvest in a ball head. But I'm pretty happy with the ones I've got at the moment. I don't think Markins are selling much anymore, so but they've got really beautiful smooth ball heads as well. So sound a little bit wrong, but you get there. Yeah, the other, yeah. So that's probably what I'd use. And
So I guess in the bigger picture, you've got the three-way kind of heads where you've got to press 3 different levers to get it all to work, which I personally don't enjoy too much, but some people enjoy them. You've got those block ones that people like Les Walking use, where you can just micro manage every single element of everything. Having levels in them is pretty helpful. If you want to start doing proper panos and things in particular, then having a level on the leg and also on the head gives you a combination, because sometimes those 2 levels can be different. Can give you a lot of control over panos in particular, and making sure your tripod's actually level. Some people have, I mean, I don't use the spikes in terms of the feet. I just get away with the rubber ones, and that's fine. I do have
really use the spiked feet.
Yeah. Do you use it? Is it in ice or snow? Where do people?
I don't really know. I mean, sometimes ice is a bit of a problem. I think if ice is hard enough, I think the spikes would even have a problem unless you really jammed them in. So I don't know. But I mean, it's some of them have a design where you actually twist it and the spike comes out, but they can often get gunked up. So they're a bit more of an older design. But yeah, I don't really. I think there's probably more of a chance you're going to pop something or scratch something with the spikes than it actually being helpful. It's much more about just finding a nice, and make sure your placement of the tripod's really good, and you should be all right. So
a lot of tripods have central points where they have a little hook underneath that you can hang a weight off, and some people actually carry a sack to
hey.
What's that?
I'm only keen on that. I think if you don't have a center column, but I'm always worried because if you've got something that's actually dangling, or maybe if it's sitting on the ground, not so bad. But if it's dangling, then it's swinging back and forth, and then that's all just going up through the center column. And so I just can't see how that's going to actually create a stable image at the end. So I'm not a huge advocate of dangling things off that, unless maybe it's on the ground itself and not moving.
I have rested bags and things against some of my legs just to stabilize a little bit.
Sometimes you don't have a choice, of course. If it's super windy and you just need to get the shot, you just have to do what you have to do. You're probably going to be a little bit blurry anyway from the wind. But yeah, I'm always a bit dubious about that.
So Robin said she went to Antarctica and got told by Peter Eastway and Art Wolf to get spikes, but she got by without them.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably it's just, you can always have it in your pack ready to go and switch them out if that's the way your tripod works. So it's not too much extra weight to carry around. It's probably something I'd keep in that little accessories bag that I had. The other question that I get asked a lot about what I use is actually batteries, and that's more just to keep things charged, maybe more on hikes and things. And it's actually really useful now. So this is the battery that I use probably the most. It's a Xiaomi brand, starts with an X and a Chinese name, and it is 20,000 milliamp hours. So it's quite a powerful battery for the size. But what I love about it's actually got a 45 watt output, so it'll actually fast charge your if you've got a Samsung phone, that'll fast charge that, and I can actually use it to power and charge my laptop as well. And then of course it's got I'm able to charge my head torch because that's rechargeable, all of my cameras from it, any other lights that I've got that are rechargeable as well. So and of course my phone when I'm traveling. So it makes it for a very important versatile kind of piece of equipment that can pretty much do everything. And I really love finding equipment that can kind of do that kind of thing. So
look, in terms of charging a phone, I mean, your camera and laptop, that's quite specific to that particular laptop.
That is to this one because it's got a power delivery through the USB Type-C in the back there, and so that's what allows that 45 watt output. But you have to really look at the specs of the power bank that you're buying and understand what it is that you're charging and make sure that they all work together.
Yeah.
There's only actually, when you do the research, there's actually only sometimes a handful or less of things that'll work with everything that you're looking at. And this is probably the only one that I've been able to find that seems to do everything that I need. And that, they're only about $50. So, it's kind of hard to go wrong with
Yeah,
that.
that's like 4 or 5 charges of an iPhone, for instance, just to give you an idea.
Yeah. So, and then also the Sony batteries are about, I think they're about 10,000. No, they're five. I can't remember now how big they are in terms of size, but they'll do quite a few camera batteries as well, which is also great to have as backup charge. I normally budget and try and take as many batteries as I need for the any walk or trip I do. But it's always nice to know that if you do go over your budget of batteries, you've still got another option, and rather than having.
So, look, Aaron was asking about how does it work charging camera batteries in general. That's why I was thinking it's a little bit specific to the type of camera you're using.
Yeah, it is. A lot of the new mirrorless cameras will have a port on the side. Obviously I'm using Sony as example, but here you've got there's a Type C and a standard micro port as well. And so I can use either of those to charge the camera. I probably prefer to use the USB Type C connection to charge it, because that's a bit more of a robust connector. And it's sort of not a good idea to leave it in your bag plugged in, because it could damage the actual socket. But you can actually plug it directly into the camera and it will charge your battery in the camera. Whereas some of the older cameras, the DSLRs, you have to actually pull out the battery and charge it in a specific charger. And so that's sort of one of the advantages of the newer technology, I suppose, there. Yeah.
Yeah, so probably quite specific, Aaron, to what
this
you're
one
using.
as well recently, and that's more of an emergency type thing. If I really need power and like I'm stranded or something, you can actually use the solar. It's going to take forever to charge, but you can use solar to charge the battery as well. And it's also got a wireless charge, so you can put if your phone's capable with wireless, you can put that against here. And what that is important for is, sometimes if you get water in your USB port or something like that, you can't actually plug it in and it doesn't work, or it might break while you're walking. So you can actually charge the phone wirelessly as well, which I think is really good as a fail-safe as well. So I've got that recently, more for when I go out and that kind of thing. That's also 20,000 as well, milliamp hours. So that they're I've spent probably way too long actually looking at batteries, but for some reason I find it interesting.
It's quite I don't know anyone who has one battery that can charge all of those things. Like, that's actually quite amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm pretty happy with it. Mind you, my laptop's just a 13-inch laptop, so it's it only requires a 45 watt input. Some of the larger laptops require quite a
mine's like
higher.
95 watts. So.
Yeah, I think some of the smaller MacBooks and anything like a Surface will probably be okay with it. But yeah, if you're getting into the 15-inch territory, you generally need something that's a little bit more main supply. So that's there as well.
So two really quick things that I always carry on with me. I have a little Samsung like solid state drive. So basically solid states when you travel are way more robust and far less prone to failure because I don't have the moving parts that traditional ones do. And if I'm doing a job, or they're really fast as well for doing a job quickly out in the field, and they usually got enough to handle whatever you need to do on a trip, or very, very, very fast download, so you're not using up as much battery life. And I have a very, very fast card reader. And I needed to get a new one to handle the new R5 CF Express cards, which are like 1,700 megabytes a second.
Yeah, I did a bit of research actually on card readers, because I was just interested in whether one I've got I should upgrade, and that's probably the fastest one on the market. Although
it's got a Pro Grade Digital CF Express B, it's called, and it has SD card reader in it as well. But I just downloaded 350 meg files in like about 20 seconds or something when I finished a job today. I was like, oh my God, it was like, I just blinked and it was already done. And it was good because I had to do a really fast turnaround on the job. Speed's not everything, but in my case, when I've got high turnaround, it's really handy. But it's also useful in that if you've got limited battery life when you're traveling. We took a laptop down the Grand Canyon for 23 days, and we had time to do 2 drops of images, we would have run out of cards because it's a lot of shooting. And so by having them running so fast, we actually used about a third of the amount of time we had needed to have that I would have using my traditional equipment. So probably future proofing a little bit. In this case, I wouldn't have bought it unless I had to actually have something that would work with a CF Express card. But the future proofing wise, a lot of cameras are going to be starting to build those in because they're just so fast.
I actually been playing with this thing that's a RevPower hub, and you can actually use it as a card reader, plug it in, and then it actually download to a hard drive without even needing a laptop. So I was sort of playing with that just to see if it's sort of capable for backups in the field without needing to take a laptop. It's obviously a lot smaller taking that than a full laptop, but I haven't really put it through its paces yet. But I think there's going to be solutions pretty well down the track where you can do it without you're just using your phone and a device like this and putting it onto a hard drive. And then, yeah, you obviously still need a phone or something, but the phone can actually connect to it and you can see all the pictures on the phone. So, yeah, so there's some cool stuff out there to play with, which I'd love to do.
Head torch, don't go anywhere without one. I usually even have it, if I'm driving around, I'll have it sitting on the gear stick on the front, or I'll have it just sitting in front of my bag all the time.
Yeah, Black Diamond's hard to go past, isn't it, with that?
This is the Black Diamond Storm, which is for quite a while now, it's been one of the best all-rounders. And you can change the color on it. You can go soft widespread with LEDs, which lasts for ages, or you can do a really long, powerful beam spread if you're trying to like paint something in the distance or find a marker when you're walking. They're quite waterproof. And you can use rechargeable batteries if you want to as well.
I'm also a big advocate of using the Revolt Black Diamond or the other rechargeable head torches because you can actually, it's not going to consume as many batteries over its life as it would if you were using one that uses disposable batteries as well. It's always also good to buy the lithium batteries because they go a lot longer and very bright as well. So just make sure your head torch takes them. They're very expensive.
Energized Lithium are a really good brand.
But if I was going to go on a big trip, I'd probably take lithium batteries, and they're actually a bit lighter as well. So there's quite a lot of advantages to going that way. But apart from the price, of course, they're worth looking into. And also you've got PLBs as well.
Oh yeah, go for that.
Personal locator beacon, which is probably something that not many people would need if you're not going anywhere where it's really off the grid. But they're definitely worth having if you go into an area where you don't think there's going to be much mobile reception. It's not much space to take up in your pack, you press the button on there and ninjas come in helicopters and as my friend Jay says and they'll come and rescue you. So
PLB stands for personal location beacon.
Yeah, that's right. So I mean these days there's other things where you can send text messages and other things, so you don't have to you can communicate off the grid. But this is kind of like I'm if you don't come and help me, I'm probably going to die kind of level of stuff. But it's good to have an option rather than just parking it. So
yeah, especially in Tasmania where we don't have. There's a lot of places we don't have reception here. So, or if your phone dies and you can't call out, this is a little extra one. I have a little tiny little tripod that I carry around that actually extends out a long way. So it's really good for doing time lapses with phone.
But a selfie stick.
Or I've been doing it. I've been using it a little bit with. I actually extend it out and use it as a bit of a light when I turn my phone on as a light as well and paint things with it. And I think Adam Williams got me to get one, I think, originally. And you can do it on Bluetooth to do like videos or promo stuff, which I was looking at doing. Or really bad selfies.
Be really good for Instagram.
Yeah. And it's actually a stabilizer for the phone as well. If you want to do videos and things as well. Just having that extra, 2 hands around just helps you to slow down and do much smoother motion. So I think it only cost me like $35 or something.
Yeah.
So I tend to use that one a bit.
Don't know if I could go there. Just too much stigma.
Come on, buddy. Selfie stick, mate. Get on it.
Awesome, Bob.
Did you see that YouTube video? That guy that goes around with a pair of bolt cutters, like chopping people's selfie sticks and then running away.
I think. Oh dear. I think probably the last thing that we should talk about, Paul, because we do have to wrap it up, but
yeah,
it's going to be hard to show people, but probably I think it's the most overlooked piece of photography equipment. It mightn't be what you think, but I actually think it's a computer monitor. because after all of the stuff we've done, we've gone and bought all of this expensive equipment, and we've got all of these hard places to get to or whatever, and taken all these amazing shots. That's the one thing that you're actually going to be using to critically evaluate all of that work. And so that could be like the one piece that sort of renders everything else kind of pointless in a way. So I've always thought that's really the critical piece in that workflow, I suppose. So it's always worth if you shell out thousands of dollars for lenses, for example, that should be monitors, I think, should actually be above that in a way, because that's really, like I said, what we're using to evaluate our work with, and prints and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, so basically, some of the Apple screens are really good straight out of the box in terms of color calibration and so on. But when you want to really get control over your work, it's about having hardware calibration, which basically means that the monitors themselves have a fixed kind of inbuilt management system around their color and their rendition. And they also give you a much more control and capacity if you're going to print your own work to actually produce a contrast ratio in particular that will match what a print's going to look like, which most high gloss screens aren't going to do. They're going to sort of over saturate and create really high contrast ratios, which you're never going to be able to reproduce in print. And so you'll always get disappointed and go, wait a minute, it looks like this on my screen. And as simple as it sounds, it takes a little while. So the cheaper monitors you can manage to some extent using the different kind of calibration software and the little spiders and different things you can run over the screen.
Yeah.
I've got an i1, the same as Luke. Spider does another one, a few others. ISO is probably top of the pops. I have an NEC, which is about half the price, but is also still hardware calibrated.
ISO.
BenQ now has some pretty affordable but quite high-end capacity options as well on the Australian market.
Yeah. Even when I used to use a Dell, they can calibrate up. You just have to look at how much you generally want an IPS screen, in-plane switching, and that basically means that if you're looking on different viewing angles, the picture doesn't change. Sometimes I see laptops where it's brighter if you look at it like that than if you look at it on like from down or something. It's like, well, how the hell are you going to know how bright your picture is if it changes the viewing angle? So you really want an IPS screen. I'm not an expert on technology, but that's what I've learned from that perspective. And then something that you can obviously calibrate, and it also covers the Adobe RGB gamut as much as possible as well. So you're not really you're able to see all of the colors that are in the picture properly. It's probably a poor way of describing it, but definitely want to have a wider gamut monitor so you can see as many colors as you can. So yeah, that's definitely the way to go. But I mean, if you have the money,
I bought mine from Image Science in Melbourne, and there's a guy there, Jeremy, that really knows his stuff. KL is another really good option, and they've got a few stores. Sydney and Melbourne are the main ones.
And you're in Tassie, full gamet's good, because we have to say that because Simon's awesome, but also they do ISO, and that their ISO is very
he's actually got a few specials. I think there's a few specials on ISO monitors at the moment. It just come out the last week. And I think Simon advertised someone on his website at Full Gamut.
It looks like it might be nationwide, the ISO special Robin's.
Yeah, until the end of the month I've got there. And Robin's ordered one. There you go. Merry Christmas to you, Robin.
Yeah. So that, I mean, obviously not saying you have to go out and spend a lot of money, but just make sure that you have something that you can tune in some way to pretty accurately know that what you're looking at is actually, what everybody else is going to be seeing, I suppose, from that perspective. So so that's.
And just be a little bit conscious that a lot of the basic screens are actually built for people to watch videos and movies and things like that. So they have really high contrast ratios and big reflective capacity, and which actually makes them much more challenging to actually accurately process your photographs, and particularly prepare them for print, because like I actually dull my screen down in brightness and reduce the contrast considerably in order to match for printing. And
the brightness is actually quite dim when you calibrate it. You go, wow, that's a lot less bright than probably what a lot of people would use the screen at. The other thing that I lost my train of thought, unfortunately. Hopefully, it will come back to me. but that's a bit awkward.
So Robin's word on the street is that her ISO she did order from Image Science, and it's slightly cheaper than the deal from KL at the moment. There you go.
What I was going to say is that also the resolution doesn't necessarily have to be as high as you think for an editing monitor. So you you kind of want something that's sort of more of a matte type screen, and a lower resolution screen. Most of the time, you still have enough detail, and there's a case to be held that if you've got too high a resolution, it can actually be really hard to perceive accurate sharpness in your pictures as well. So some folks would say that 4K might actually be too far in terms of a resolution. I guess it depends on how big the actual screen is as well. But it doesn't have to be a big screen. It doesn't have to be a high resolution screen. It just needs to be able to really reflect accurate colors.
If you've got the money, 24, or in my case, I've got 27, is really nice.
Mine's a 24. It's totally fine.
Estate.
Yeah.
Like you can push them out to 30. I mean, you're probably a lot more expensive. I don't know if it's worth it, but at the same time, it's about what you can afford.
Yeah, I think
ISO has like 3 different ranges, I think, in terms of the capacity and the capability that they have. So you can kind of get entry level ones and then move right up to the top. But if you're going to invest in something like that, really spend some time with someone like Jeremy or KL to get them to take you through the pro, or Simon at full gamut to make sure you understand what you're getting and not getting.
Absolutely.
Luke hit the money. We discussed that before the show, that we should put that in, because it's quite easy to overlook that one, and yet to go to all this time and trouble and not be able to manage how your images are going to end up being viewed and looked at and printed is a little bit falling short of the mark, I think.
Yeah, it's a lot of irony there, I suppose, if all of that money's been put into the equipment but not into the final piece in the chain there. So I guess there's heaps more that we could have talked about in terms of storage ideas, and there's probably enough to talk about an IT.
Well, I think digital asset management is a show unto itself, Lukey, I reckon.
But and backing up and what to do with those sort of workflows and things. But and it's not necessarily very interesting material to listen to. But if there's one thing that's most important out of everything you do is backing up, because that's your whole life's work there sitting on those drives. So yeah, that's become, I've been spending the last few days building a server buried in drives and all sorts of things. I'm trying to get all of that sorted out. So it's definitely front of mind for me.
And I invested in a $2,500 sort of 32 terabyte system earlier this year, which I'm really glad I did. Just save my bacon the other day already. But I put it off for ages. Lukey found a 14 terabyte drive for, what was it, $300?
14 terabyte drive was, I think it was about $300.
It's WD.
Amazon, was it? Yeah, Western Digital 14
He's
terabyte.
so good at finding deals. I haven't found it since, of course.
You go on Ozbarg, and they'll often talk about deals on hard drives and things. That's well worth following over there. But yeah, that's I think it was one of the deals of the century, that one. So
that's a very cost-effective way. You get 2 of those and carbon copy them. You've got 14 terabytes backed up for $600. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty decent. You definitely want more than one copy. Anyway, we're going into other space there. Look, thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. We seem to have managed to be able to keep your attention for all that time. So hopefully you got something out of it. And, there's
good man.
A lot of knowledge swirling around in our heads over the years that we've been doing that. So it's nice to sort of unleash the beast there and mention a few things. Sorry if it got a bit.
Yeah, and that's a lot of time looking at our ugly faces. So well done with that one.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't really have any.
We didn't even show a picture, Lukey. Not even one. That's the first show I think we've ever done that.
I don't think we've had an episode without doing that.
Oh my God! And everyone still stayed and kept watching. Yeah. It's a miracle.
Yeah. That's great. So so we've got one show left for the year, which will be next week, and then we're going to have some pre-recorded shows from some US photographers over the Christmas break, which we'll be releasing on YouTube only. I don't know if we're going to premiere them or we'll just make them live and just sort of promote it from there, but there'll be a couple more shows coming up there, and then
there's 2 reasons for that. One, so we can have Christmas with our families, and 2, the only way we can work with Americans is to do something recorded, because it's 3:00 in the morning when our show starts. And so I've got 2 amazing American photographers that are very close friends, lined up, very unique individuals and pretty humorous, lined up to interview on Monday, actually. And hopefully another one a week later. So that way, because Luke and I are normally freaking all over the place. I'm normally all over the world. So the fact we've done 30 episodes live pretty much every single week for almost 8 months is incredible, actually.
Yeah, I sort of was trying to work out how I managed to do that, but obviously we're passionate enough about it to keep it together. So no, that's great, and we've got already some really brilliant ideas of what. Well, we would think that, wouldn't we? But some good topic ideas for next
Well, I
year.
think in terms of being able to realistically maintain the show, because obviously we just do it for love on our own time, is that we might start introducing a few recorded shows here and there for times that we might both be away working or need a break or whatever, or traveling when we hopefully can, which we haven't been to, and also to give us the flexibility of start reaching out into more international audience and dealing with those time differences. And Luke, Nick's actually hopefully lining up a few UK photographers as well, which is another incredible area of some
Yeah,
of
and
the
the good thing about UK is that if they're available, we'd probably be able to do that live as well, which is pretty cool. So
we did Serena and Iceland live. I think it was 9:30 in the morning when
it's
we
9
were
in the morning
doing
or
it.
10 in the morning. So that's really good. Yeah, so that's
Stay tuned for some different accents.
all right. So we'll leave it there for the moment, and look out for the updates on what we're doing next week. And thanks so much. If you do have any questions, by the way, feel free to ask. I mightn't be able to get back to them straight away, but I'm certainly always happy to help with gear stuff because I just love talking gear. And I'm sure Paul's the same, although I'm probably not on my level. So yeah, thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you again same time next week. Catch you later.
All right, cheers, everyone. Have a good week.